Imagine your brain is a courtroom, but the judge is biased, and the verdict is decided before the trial begins. That's confirmation bias. It's not a mistake. It's how your mind protects itself from dissonance. Your brain wants harmony between belief and reality, so it filters out what doesn't fit. You read headlines that affirm your views. You ignore data that contradicts them. You trust sources that agree with you. And when you're wrong, your mind makes sure you still feel right. In psychology experiments, people were shown mixed evidence about gun control, climate change, and vaccines. No matter how strong the opposing data, they clung tighter to their original stance. This isn't stupidity. It's self-preservation. You argue to defend, not to grow. You filter to feel secure, not to find truth. But here's the key. Ask yourself, what would it take to change your mind? Not to agree instantly, but to genuinely reconsider. If your answer is nothing, then your belief is no longer a thought. It's a shield, and that's dangerous. You have to train your mind to crave truth, not comfort. Question even what feels obvious. Challenge your reflexes, your feeds, your filters. Confirmation bias is not a flaw to erase. It's a force to understand. Once you see it, you can disarm it. That's not just intelligence. That's evolution in motion. And remember, changing your mind isn't weakness. It's the purest form of strength, because it means you're still awake, trusted. Someone speaking your dialect, safer. A familiar flag, a shared belief, a matching badge. Your heart opens. This is in-group bias, a cognitive reflex so deep it overrides logic. What if this loyalty isn't love, but ancient wiring? In early human history, tribes meant survival. Outsiders could be dangerous. So we evolved a shortcut. Favor those like us. But in the modern world, it's no longer about spears and shelters. It's politics, race, religion, class. And this instinct, once protective, now divides, blinds, and corrupts. In a famous study, children were randomly assigned red or blue shirts. Within minutes, they preferred their own color, shared more, trusted more, and excluded the others. No history, no reason, just tribe. Adults aren't better. We see it in courtrooms, where jurors judge more harshly if the defendant is from another race. In companies that hire based on alma maters. In wars where killing is justified by flags. In-group bias makes us irrational. It's why we'll overlook cruelty if it's done by our side. Why we'll defend liars, cheer for violence, excuse injustice, so long as it's our group. Loyalty replaces morality. Familiarity replaces truth. To escape it, we must pause. Ask, if they weren't one of us, would I feel the same? If the roles were reversed, would I still call this fair? Logic begins where loyalty ends. Evolution made us tribal, but evolution can be outgrown. Only when we see each other not as us and them, but as human, does reason return. That gut feeling of, they're one of us, isn't virtue, it's chemistry. But awareness turns instinct into insight. You can still belong, but without being blind. What if every risk you ever took, every coin you ever flipped, meant nothing to the next one? Imagine you're standing in a casino, the roulette wheel spinning, ticking like a heartbeat. It lands on black, once, twice, 10 times in a row. The room changes, whispers ripple. Red is due, they say, and you believe it too. But here's the trap. The wheel doesn't remember. Every spin is a clean slate. The past has no weight. And that belief, that previous outcomes influence future chances, is the gambler's fallacy. It's not just a fluke of logic, it's a cognitive illusion wired into your brain. In 1913, at the Monte Carlo casino, black came up 26 consecutive times. People lost fortunes betting on red, convinced balance was inevitable. But probability isn't fairness. The odds don't care. A fair coin flipped 100 times still gives you 50. 50 every single time. Your mind, built to detect patterns in the wild, finds them in chaos. A streak becomes a signal. A loss feels like a setup for a win. That's why slot machines draw crowds, and people chase bad hands with hope. But randomness doesn't reward hope. It obeys no memory. The dice roll isn't karma, it's entropy. This fallacy infects more than games. It clouds judgment in relationships. They've hurt me so much, surely they'll change. It haunts investors. This stock's crashed. It must rise soon. It shapes beliefs. So many bad days. A good one must come. But the universe makes no promises. Freedom begins when you let go of what's due. Every moment is its own coin flip. Every risk is born again. The future is not built from fairness. It's built from chance. Let go of the story. See the math. And in that chaos, find your peace. Let the coin fall where it may. Imagine walking into a store and spotting a luxury watch tagged at $2,000. You walk away, then see another for $300. Suddenly, it feels affordable, even though $300 is still a lot for a watch. But that first number didn't leave your mind. It anchored you. This is anchoring bias, a powerful glitch in the way we make decisions. The first number, idea, or detail you encounter, no matter how random, becomes the reference point, and everything that follows is judged through its lens, whether it makes sense or not. In 1974, psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky asked people whether Mahatma Gandhi was older or younger than 144 when he died. Then they asked his actual age. The anchor, 144 or 35, drastically changed people's guesses. Even when absurd, the first number planted itself deep in the mind, twisting logic into assumption and clouding rational thought. It happens when you negotiate salary. If the employer starts low, your counteroffer shrinks. If you're told a painting is worth $10,000, it suddenly feels valuable, even if it's a fake. That's the trap. Anchors don't just skew prices, they warp reality. First impressions become mental anchors. The first opinion in a group sets the tone. The first review colors how you see a movie. The first story you hear, it shapes the ones that follow, even if it's false or misleading. Anchoring bias doesn't fade with awareness. Even when we know it's happening, we still lean toward the first thing we saw or heard. It's mental gravity, subtle, invisible, and incredibly strong. Your mind wants a shortcut, but shortcuts come at a cost. So, next time something feels fair, pause, trace the comparison. Ask, who gave me this number and why? And what would I think if I'd seen something else first? Imagine waking up one day with a flash of insight, suddenly convinced you've mastered a skill after barely scratching the surface. That's not confidence. It's the Dunning-Kruger effect, a psychological illusion where the less you know, the more certain you become. It's the paradox of ignorance. Those who know the least are often the most convinced they're right, while true experts tread carefully. In 1999, researchers David Dunning and Justin Kruger put this to the test. They gave participants grammar, logic, and humor quizzes. Those who scored lowest believed they had outperformed their peers. Their ignorance robbed them of the ability to recognize their own flaws. Meanwhile, top performers underestimated themselves, assuming what was easy for them must be easy for everyone else. Think about it. How often do you hear loud certainty from those with only surface-level understanding? The coworker who read one article and now speaks like a guru. The rookie who critiques seasoned professionals, unaware of the hidden depth they're missing. Real experts? They pause, not out of doubt, but because they see the vast unknowns that lie ahead. This effect isn't rare. It creeps into politics, medicine, education, anywhere humans form opinions. It's why bad leaders thrive, why misinformation spreads, why simple solutions are shouted with boldness, while complex truths are whispered in caution. The cure? Humility. The courage to admit you don't know everything. The strength to listen more than you speak. Because the more you truly understand, the more you realize how much remains beyond your grasp. And maybe, just maybe, the wisest voice in the room is the one still asking questions. Imagine flipping a coin. It lands heads 5 times in a row. You feel it deep in your gut. Tails must be next. But that feeling? That's a lie. That's the representativeness heuristic. It's your brain's instinct to see patterns where none exist, to believe randomness should look fair, even when it doesn't. You expect balance, symmetry, logic, but true randomness doesn't follow your expectations. Each coin flip is independent. The odds haven't changed. But your brain treats the streak like a story. You feel tension that needs release. You think a gambler on a losing streak is due for a win. You believe that a quiet stretch of road is safe because no crashes happened recently. You assume a person who looks like a librarian must be one, ignoring the actual probabilities. Your mind trades real math for mental shortcuts. These shortcuts once helped humans react fast in chaos, but now they trick us. In investing, people see patterns in stock charts that don't exist. In sports, they trust a hot hand, even when stats say otherwise. But here's the truth. Randomness doesn't owe you anything. The coin has no memory. The dice don't care. Recognizing this bias is the first step to resisting it. It means seeing events as they are, not as your pattern-hungry brain wants them to be. True wisdom is knowing the difference between chaos and design. Every random moment is just that, random. Don't waste your logic chasing illusions. Let go of patterns. Choose awareness. Imagine the moment after a disaster, a breakup, a scandal, or even a sports loss. You shake your head and say, "I knew this would happen." But did you really? Or is your brain rewriting history to make the past feel predictable? This is hindsight bias, the illusion that an event was obvious only after it occurred. Your mind doesn't like uncertainty. So, once something happens, it reshapes memory to fit the outcome. What if the feeling of, "I saw it coming," is just a trick of confidence? In 1972, researchers told participants about a historical battle. Half were told the British won, the others that they lost. Regardless of outcome, both groups believed the result was inevitable. Their minds bent the facts to fit what they were told. It wasn't logic. It was hindsight. This happens constantly. After 9/11s, people claimed that the warnings were clear, but those warnings only stood out after disaster struck. After every breakup, people say, "I knew it." After market crashes, pundits retroactively invent logic. But before it happened, no one agreed. That's the danger. Hindsight doesn't make us wise. It makes us arrogant. We forget how uncertain the world felt before the outcome. We stop asking hard questions. We assume we were right all along. It even warps justice. Jurors overestimate how predictable a crime was. Doctors blame themselves for not seeing what couldn't be known. And in life, we punish ourselves for not predicting the unpredictable. Real insight requires humility. The past feels neat, but it was chaos. The mind smooths it out to protect the ego. But if we want real growth, we must remember the fog. That we didn't know. That we couldn't have. That knowing now is not the same as knowing then. What if the biggest lie you ever believed was that nothing bad could really happen to you? Imagine hearing about a car crash, a cancer diagnosis, a breakup, a layoff. You flinch, but then quietly think, "That won't be me." That's optimism bias, the deeply ingrained belief that negative events are more likely to hit others than ourselves. It feels like hope, but it's built on illusion. In study after study, people are shown the actual odds of divorce, illness, accidents, then asked to rate their own chances. Most believe they'll dodge the bullet. Smokers believe they'll be the exception. Cyclists think they won't crash. People sign up for mortgages, jobs, marriages, convinced the worst-case scenario only happens in someone else's story. This isn't just wishful thinking. It's a neurological glitch. The prefrontal cortex underestimates threats when thinking about ourselves. It filters the future through a golden haze, muting the volume of risk. And ironically, this very optimism can make us less prepared for disaster. We skip insurance, avoid doctors, stay in toxic relationships, all because our brains whisper, "You're different. You'll be fine." But optimism bias doesn't make you lucky. It makes you blind. And when reality hits, it hits hard, because you never saw it coming. That's the danger. Not just the event, but the shock of being wrong. It isn't the fall that breaks you, it's the disbelief. Awareness isn't pessimism, it's power. To see the storm coming doesn't mean you expect doom, it means you carry an umbrella when the sky darkens. Optimism can still be your ally, but only when it walks beside realism, not ahead of it with eyes closed. The goal isn't to fear the future, it's to face it, with your eyes open and your heart prepared. Imagine staring at clouds and suddenly seeing a face, or hearing whispers in static, or feeling like a certain number follows you everywhere. Your mind isn't broken, it's doing exactly what it's wired to do. This is patternicity, the tendency to find meaningful patterns in random noise. It's how humans evolved, to detect danger, opportunity, and meaning even when none exists. It kept our ancestors alive. But today, it can warp our perception of reality. We see a shadow and think predator. A coincidence becomes a sign. Two events become a conspiracy. The brain is a pattern-seeking machine, and often it overreaches. In 2008, Michael Shermer coined the term patternicity to explain why people see faces in toast or believe in supernatural omens. Our minds prefer a wrong pattern over no pattern at all. Why? Because uncertainty feels like death. Patterns give us control, even if it's false. Gamblers believe a slot machine is due. People think lucky socks influence a game. Investors find signals in meaningless stock fluctuations. None of it's real, but it feels real. Because the brain doesn't just recognize patterns, it adds story to them. It's not just 3 stars, it's Orion. Not just lines in the sand, it's fate. We turn chaos into narrative. Patternicity fuels religion, folklore, conspiracy theories, even love. You meet someone on a rainy Tuesday after 3 strange dreams, and suddenly, it's destiny. But is it? Or is your brain just trying to make sense of chaos by scripting a story you can live with? The danger isn't seeing patterns, it's trusting them blindly. The world is random, but our brains demand rhythm. So, next time you spot a sign in the sky or a message in numbers, pause. Ask, is it meaning or just noise dressed as fate? Authority bias. Imagine a voice of power tells you what to do, and without thinking, you obey. That's authority bias, a deep-rooted cognitive flaw where we give extra weight to statements, beliefs, and decisions simply because they come from someone in a position of authority. It doesn't matter if they're wrong. We're wired to believe them anyway. In the 1960s, psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted an infamous experiment. Volunteers were told by a man in a lab coat to administer electric shocks to a stranger. As screams echoed from the next room, many continued, even when it was clear the person might be in pain. Why? Because the command came from a so-called expert. A white coat overruled human conscience. We trust doctors, CEOs, politicians, influencers, often without questioning their motives or accuracy. If a famous chef says a certain food is healthy, we accept it. If a tech mogul backs a startup, we believe it must be revolutionary. This trust isn't earned, it's given, blindly. But authority doesn't guarantee truth. It can amplify lies. It can manipulate masses. It can silence better ideas from quieter voices. History is filled with disasters led by people in power who were believed without question, because no one dared defy their authority. This bias lurks in headlines, advertisements, and classrooms. It shapes beliefs, purchases, even elections. It's why false claims gain traction when backed by titles and symbols of power. And it's why being aware isn't just smart, it's necessary. The antidote isn't rebellion for rebellion's sake, it's critical thinking. Ask not just who said it, but does it hold up under scrutiny? True wisdom comes not from obeying authority, but from daring to question it. Because sometimes the most dangerous idea is the one no one challenges. Status quo bias. Imagine standing at a fork in the road. One path is familiar, worn, easy. The other is uncertain, new, and possibly better. Yet you stay where you are, not because it's best, but because it's known. That's the status quo bias. Your brain prefers stability over improvement. It fears loss more than it values gain. So you stick with the current job, the current system, the current habits, even when logic screams for change. In behavioral economics, studies show people overwhelmingly choose default options. Given the chance to opt into better plans, most won't lift a finger. In one experiment, participants were more likely to keep an inherited stock portfolio than reallocate it, even when the changes promised better returns. In medicine, patients often refuse newer treatments simply because they're not what they're used to. This bias hides under the illusion of wisdom, but comfort isn't always safe. It can trap you in broken systems, toxic relationships, outdated routines. The status quo feels like control, but it's often just fear in disguise. The world changes, nature evolves, and survival doesn't reward those who stay. It rewards those who adapt. Growth doesn't happen in familiar places. It happens when you step into the unknown, despite discomfort. The next time you say, "This is how it's always been," ask yourself, does that make it right? Or just easy? The crown that comfort wears is heavy, but you were built to move, not to sit beneath it. Let discomfort guide you, not scare you. The risk isn't in changing. The real danger is staying exactly the same forever. Spotlight effect. Imagine walking into a crowded room. You trip slightly over the edge of a carpet, and in that moment, your heart pounds. You're sure everyone saw it. That awkward laugh you let out too loudly? They noticed. That coffee stain on your shirt? It's glaring, right? But here's the reality. Most people didn't notice at all. This is the spotlight effect. Your mind's illusion that the world is watching your every move, when in truth, they're lost in their own worries. What if the fear of being judged is just your ego magnifying the mirror? In a Cornell University study, students wore a cringeworthy Barry Manilow t-shirt into a room full of strangers. They predicted that half the room would spot it. But in reality, only 23% noticed. Why? Because others were too caught up in their own internal monologues to care, just like you are. This cognitive bias doesn't just make you feel embarrassed, it paralyzes expression. It stops people from raising hands in class, asking questions at meetings, or wearing what they truly love. It creates a false stage with imagined critics. But the truth? Everyone's backstage worrying about their own lines, and that's the liberation. Your biggest blunders? Forgotten. Your flaws? Invisible. People remember how you made them feel, not how your voice cracked or what you wore. You are not under a spotlight. You're in a room full of mirrors where everyone's too busy looking at themselves. So speak up, fall down, laugh louder. The light you think is burning on you, it's not. It's just your imagination, mistaking self-awareness for scrutiny. Let it go. Live freely. No one is tracking your every flaw. They're too busy surviving their own. So don't dim your spark. You were never on stage to begin with. Self-serving bias. What if your memory of triumphs and failures was edited by you? Imagine acing a test. You tell yourself, I studied hard. I earned this. Now imagine failing it. The teacher was unfair. The questions were trickier than usual. That mental flip? That's self-serving bias. The human tendency to credit ourselves for success, but blame external forces for failure. It protects our ego, but distorts the truth. In one study, students were randomly told they passed or failed a fake test. Those who passed praised their own intelligence. Those who failed blamed the test. The same people, the same brains, different outcomes. Yet, the narrative warped instantly, because we need to believe we're competent, even if it means lying to ourselves. This bias isn't rare. Athletes credit training when they win, then blame referees when they lose. CEOs boast when stock prices rise, then blame the economy when they crash. In relationships, we say, I gave everything when things go right. But they ruined it when it ends. We twist reality to protect our self-image. But here's the danger. When we only own the wins, we never grow from the losses. Every failure becomes someone else's fault. Every stumble becomes fate's cruelty. Self-serving bias builds a wall around your ego, but that wall becomes your prison. True strength comes from owning it all, to say, that was me, that mistake, mine. But here's how I'll fix it. That's not weakness, it's evolution. That's how you rise, that's how you lead. That's how you become someone unshakable. Not because you never fall, but because you never pretend you didn't. And in that brutal honesty lies real power. Because the truth, even when it hurts, will always teach you more than any excuse ever will. Planning fallacy. Imagine thinking you will finish that task in 2 hours. Maybe a report, an assignment, a renovation. Even though it took twice as long last time, this time, somehow, you believe you'll beat the clock. You plan with hope. But reality drags. This is the planning fallacy, a cognitive illusion where we underestimate how long tasks will take, even if we've done them before, even if we know better. In 1979, psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky coined the term. They asked students to predict how long their thesis would take. Most guessed 34 weeks. The average time? 56. Even those who said, if everything goes wrong, still underestimated. The brain doesn't plan for delays. It imagines best-case scenarios. It forgets roadblocks, distractions, fatigue, interruptions, life. The planning fallacy isn't just about laziness. It's optimism, fused with flawed memory. When we imagine the future, we picture success, not the grind. We recall what went right, not the hours lost. This bias ruins budgets, delays construction, wrecks goals. It's why projects spiral, why deadlines become jokes, why people think writing a book, building a business, or changing their life will take months, not years. And here's the twist. Even when warned, people still do it. Even with data, we resist pessimism. The illusion is persistent because it feels good to believe we'll be better this time. But planning based on fiction leads to failure. Real planning requires confrontation with the past, with time, with ourselves. So next time you set a goal, double it. Then add more. Assume you'll get distracted. Assume you'll get tired. Then plan anyway. Because time doesn't care about our optimism, but success rewards those who plan for reality. False consensus effect. Imagine believing your thoughts are echoed by the majority, only to discover you're standing alone. That's the false consensus effect, a powerful cognitive illusion where we overestimate how many people share our beliefs, values, and decisions. It's not just ego, it's a built-in bias. Our brains crave belonging, so they manufacture agreement, even when it doesn't exist. In the late 1970s, psychologist Lee Ross conducted an experiment. Participants were asked whether they would wear a sandwich board reading, "Eat at Joe's." Those who agreed believed most others would too. Those who declined assumed most would reject it. Each side projected its own choice onto the population. Their minds didn't just form an opinion, they distorted the social map. This illusion thrives online. Social media feeds us what we already like, hiding disagreement. Surrounded by likes, shares, and agreeable voices, we begin to think our view is the default. In politics, it's even more extreme. "Everyone I know thinks this way" becomes proof. But often, what we really mean is, "Everyone like me thinks this way." And that's not consensus, it's isolation. The false consensus effect makes us blind to diversity. It encourages arrogance, hardens opinions, and creates division. When we think our view is widely held, we stop questioning it. We stop listening. We stop evolving. The antidote is humility, realizing that your truth is not the world's truth. Ask yourself, who have I not listened to? Who challenges my view? Because wisdom doesn't come from finding agreement. It comes from understanding why others disagree. The world isn't a mirror, it's a mosaic. And clarity begins when you stop expecting to see yourself in every reflection. Imagine living in a world where one insult cuts deeper than 10 compliments can heal. That's not weakness, it's wiring. It's the negativity bias. Your brain evolved to prioritize danger, not delight. One bad experience can dominate your memory, hijack your mood, and shape your identity. Why? Because in our evolutionary past, noticing threats meant survival. Missing a berry wasn't fatal, but missing a predator was. So your mind learned to spotlight the bad. A single failure echoes longer than repeated success. You remember criticism vividly but forget praise quickly. A frown sticks, a compliment fades. Relationships crumble not from lack of good moments, but from the weight of a few bad ones. In workplaces, one harsh review can eclipse years of effort. Online, a single hateful comment can override hundreds of likes. It's not fair, but it is real. The negativity bias shapes how you judge yourself, how you trust others, how you experience the world. But awareness is your defense. You can train your mind to pause. You can practice gratitude deliberately, replay good moments intentionally, and balance the scales. This isn't toxic positivity. It's cognitive recalibration. You're not erasing pain, you're adjusting the lens. Remember, your brain isn't built for happiness, it's built for survival. But you're not just your brain. You can choose what to amplify. You can override the bias. And every time you do, you reclaim a little more peace, a little more truth, a little more control. The bad will always shout louder, but you decide what echoes. Focus is power. Let what's good be louder, stronger, and longer lasting. That's the path out of the trap your instincts built. Stay awake. Availability, heuristic. Imagine watching the news and hearing about a plane crash. The images are burned into your mind. Twisted metal, screaming survivors, flames licking the sky. Now, the next time you're booking a flight, your stomach tightens. You think, planes are dangerous. But are they? Or did your brain just fall into the trap of the availability heuristic? This mental shortcut makes us overestimate the importance of what we can easily recall. The more vivid, emotional, or dramatic the memory, the more real and frequent it feels. Statistically, flying is far safer than driving. But we fear the sky because plane crashes are burned into memory, loud, tragic, rare. Meanwhile, the quiet death toll of car crashes and disease slips past unnoticed. In a classic study, people guess that tornadoes kill more people than asthma. They're wrong. But tornadoes are dramatic, memorable, cinematic. Asthma is silent. The mind is biased towards spectacle. We think shark attacks are common, but cows kill more people annually. Why don't we fear cows? Because no one makes movies about cows. It affects how we vote, how we donate, how we judge others. A single tragic story can outweigh 1,000 statistics. We fear terrorism more than diabetes. We prepare for lightning, but ignore heart disease. We react to headlines, not data. And it's dangerous. The availability heuristic blinds us to the true shape of risk. It distorts our decisions with echoes of the loudest stories. To escape it, we must step back. Ask, what are the facts? What am I missing in silence while memory shouts? What feels true isn't always real, and what's quiet can kill. Truth hides in the ordinary. Fear lives in the memorable. But wisdom, it listens to what's not being said. Look past the noise. That's where reality begins. Just world hypothesis. What if your need to feel safe made you quietly cruel? Imagine seeing someone suffer, losing a job, getting sick, falling into poverty. You flinch, then think, they must have done something wrong. That reflex, it's not logic. It's the just world hypothesis. The belief that the world is fair and people get what they deserve. It sounds comforting, but it's a dangerous illusion. Psychologist Melvin Lerner discovered it in the 1960s. In his experiments, participants watched a woman receive painful electric shocks. When they were powerless to stop it, many began to rationalize her pain, saying she must have done something to deserve it. Not because she had, but because they couldn't bear a reality where good people suffer for no reason. You see this bias ripple through society. A homeless person is assumed lazy. A sexual assault victim is blamed for what they wore. A terminal illness is linked to personal habits. We invent flaws to explain misfortune, because if tragedy is random, then it could happen to anyone, even us. This illusion comforts the mind but corrodes the soul. It swaps empathy for judgment. It tells us the universe balances itself, so we don't have to. But real life isn't a fairy tale. Lightning strikes the kind. Injustice is loud and everywhere. Real justice begins when we stop pretending pain is earned. To challenge the just world hypothesis is to step into uncomfortable truth. To stop asking, did they deserve it? And start asking, how can I help? That shift is where humanity begins. That's how fairness is made, not by fate, but by choice. And that choice is yours, every time, even when it hurts, especially then. Imagine someone cuts you off in traffic. Instantly you think, what a jerk. No hesitation, no context, just judgment. But if you make the same move, it's different. You were late, distracted, stressed, in a rush. This is the fundamental attribution error, a deep-rooted bias where we explain others' actions by blaming their character, while excusing our own with circumstance. When someone snaps at you, you assume they're rude or aggressive. When you snap, it's because you didn't sleep, or your day fell apart. A stranger doesn't say hi, you decide they're cold or arrogant. But if you ignore someone, it's because you were lost in thought. This asymmetry defines how we see the world. It protects our ego and simplifies complex people into neat, predictable labels. In 1977, psychologists Lee Ross and colleagues studied this distortion. They discovered how we overemphasize personality traits in others while underestimating situational forces. Especially in Western cultures that glorify individuality, we forget that context matters. People aren't just personalities, they're reactions to unseen pressures. You don't see the flat tire, the panic attack, the fight before work. You just see the outcome and judge it instantly. This error builds walls. It feeds conflict. It turns misunderstandings into grudges and strangers into enemies. Empathy requires effort and judgment is fast. But when we stop and consider that every person is living a story we don't know, the sharpness of our assumptions begins to fade. So, next time someone lets you down, pause. Don't ask, what's wrong with them? Ask, what might be happening to them? Because one day, someone will judge you too, and they won't see your story, only your slip. Imagine flipping a coin and winning $1 million. Was flipping that coin a smart decision? Or just dumb luck dressed in gold? Outcome bias tells you it was brilliant. But here's the trap. We judge decisions by their results, not their reasoning. And that's a recipe for disaster. Outcome bias is one of the most deceptive thinking errors. It convinces us that a good result justifies the means, even if those means were reckless, flawed, or illogical. A risky business move pays off. Genius. A cautious, informed decision fails. Foolish. But in reality, the outcome is only part of the story. In a famous psychological experiment, people were given 2 identical scenarios, one with a positive outcome, one negative. Though the decisions were exactly the same, Participants praised one and condemned the other. Why? Because we don't judge logic, we judge results. This happens every day. A surgeon breaks protocol but saves a life, praised as heroic. Another follows every rule but the patient dies. They're blamed. A CEO takes a wild gamble and wins. They're called visionary. Another makes smart choices that don't work out, and they're labeled incompetent. But the truth is, success often masks stupidity, and failure can hide wisdom. Judging only the result is like grading a test by the final score without checking the work. You miss the thinking, the nuance, the truth beneath the outcome. The cure is learning to separate decision quality from results. Ask, what information was available at the time? Was the reasoning sound, even if the ending wasn't? Because real wisdom doesn't chase luck, it honors logic. And in a world full of noise, the clearest signal of intelligence is thinking clearly when the ending is still unknown. Imagine building a house on sand. The foundation cracks, the walls lean, but because you've already spent so much, you keep pouring money, time, and energy into it, hoping it'll hold. That's the sunk cost fallacy. It's the illusion that past investment should justify future commitment, even when the path forward leads nowhere. Your brain resists waste. It clings to the idea that effort equals value, but time spent is not a promise of future reward. Economists say rationality means cutting your losses, yet emotionally that feels like surrender. So, you stay in a bad relationship because of the years you've already put in. You stick with a failing project because it's already cost you thousands. You don't walk out of a movie you hate because the ticket was expensive, but those costs are gone, spent, irrecoverable. The future is not obligated to pay them back. In psychology, this fallacy shows up in business, in love, in war. Leaders keep fighting unwinnable battles just to justify the sacrifices already made, but it only digs the hole deeper. Each moment forward is a chance to choose better. Let go of the weight you've carried, just to prove you were right. You don't owe your past anything but clarity. The true cost isn't walking away. It's staying stuck in something just to avoid feeling regret. Wisdom isn't pushing through. It's knowing when to stop. When you let go of what's lost, you gain control over what's still possible. That's not failure. That's freedom. You are not your investment. You are your next decision. Regret is not a roadmap. Release it. The more you invest in the wrong thing, the less space you have for the right one. You are allowed to change direction. You are allowed to walk away. Start, no. Imagine two signs. One says 90% fat-free. The other says contains 10% fat. Both describe the same thing, but one feels healthier. Why? Because the mind doesn't just hear facts, it feels them. This is the framing effect, a cognitive bias where the way information is phrased changes our entire reaction, even when the numbers are identical. What if your choices weren't driven by truth, but by how the truth was wrapped? In a famous study by Tversky and Kahneman, participants faced a deadly disease scenario. They could choose between a program that would save 200 lives, or one with a 1/3 chance that all 600 live and a 2/3 chance all die. Most chose the certain option. But when the same outcome was framed as 400 people will die, people flipped to the risky one. Nothing changed, except the frame. We see this everywhere. Politicians talk about tax relief instead of tax cuts for the rich. Marketers say 95% success rate, not 5% failure. Hospitals say 80% survival instead of 20% mortality. The wording paints emotions around the same reality, and those emotions steer us. The framing effect influences elections, juries, public opinion, even your dinner order. You don't just react to facts, you react to how they're lit, staged, spun. And often, it's invisible. That's the danger. It feels like choice, but it's suggestion in disguise. To resist it, you have to flip the script. Ask, what's the inverse? What's the spin? What would this feel like if it were said differently? Real clarity means stripping away the performance to find the plain truth. And the truth doesn't care how it sounds. Because when you see through the frame, you reclaim your judgment. You choose not by fear or comfort, but by what's real, raw, and unshaped. What if your belief in momentum was just a trick of the mind? Imagine a basketball player sinking shot after shot. The crowd roars, "He's on fire!" Commentators call it a hot hand. You expect the next shot to fall too, But here's the catch. In games of chance or random variance, that streak means nothing. That belief in the hot hand, it's a fallacy. The term was coined in 1985 by psychologists Gilovich, Vallone, and Tversky. And they studied basketball shooting patterns and found no consistent increase in shot accuracy during supposed hot streaks. It felt real, but the numbers didn't back it up. Random clusters happen, but we mistake them for skill peaking. We confuse rhythm with inevitability. The fallacy isn't limited to sports. In casinos, gamblers ride a win streak, believing luck is flowing through their veins. In stocks, traders think a rising asset will continue to soar just because it has. We believe heat is contagious, when it's often just noise wearing confidence. The mind craves patterns, even where none exist. But here's the danger. We start betting on the streak instead of the strategy. We double down on momentum instead of math. We worship heat and ignore probability. And when the streak ends, and it always ends, we're left stunned. Not because the odds betrayed us, but because we stopped seeing them. The hot hand feels good. It feeds the myth of control. But truth lives in the numbers, and real success, it's not about riding streaks. It's about consistency through chaos. It's about discipline when the fire fades. The best don't just get hot. They endure the cold and still keep shooting, because greatness isn't found in the streak. It's built in the silence between. Imagine someone tells you what to do. Don't eat that, don't go there, don't say this. Even if it's reasonable, even if it's right, something in you resists. Not because you disagree, but because it feels like control. That flare in your chest? That's psychological reactance. The built-in reflex that pushes back when freedom is threatened. Even if the rebellion harms us, we still do it, to prove no one owns our will, our voice, our choice. Reactance explains why teens break rules just because they're rules, why adults ignore health warnings or reject help when they need it most. In 1966, psychologist Jack Brame defined this bias. When choices shrink, resistance grows. Say, don't press this button, and suddenly that's the only thing you want to do. It's not about logic. It's about reclaiming lost autonomy. It's your mind screaming, I decide. Think of the forbidden fruit or the do not enter door. These aren't temptations. They're symbols of limits, of boundaries. And so they become obsessions. Even when people protest against masks, curfews, or seatbelts, the fight isn't always about belief. It's about power, the illusion that no one can make them comply. They'd rather lose comfort or safety than lose control. This isn't immaturity. It's wiring. Reactance is emotional armor, a shield against control, but it's blunt. It doesn't ask if the threat is real. It just resists. And in that resistance, we often hurt ourselves, proving we're free by doing what's harmful. So the next time you feel the urge to say no, not because it's wrong, but because it's imposed, pause. Ask, am I choosing or just reacting? Because real freedom isn't doing the opposite. It's choosing the path, even if it's the one you were warned about. Imagine hearing the same sentence over and over until it feels true, even if it's a lie. That's the illusory truth effect, the psychological trap where repetition tricks your brain into mistaking familiarity for accuracy. It doesn't matter if something is false. If you've heard it enough, it starts to feel right. This bias was first discovered in 1977. Researchers told participants random trivia, some true, some false. Weeks later, when asked again, people were more likely to believe the false statements they'd already heard. Not because they remembered the facts, but because the words felt familiar. Familiarity became credibility. In today's world, this effect has exploded. Social media floods us with repeating slogans, headlines, and catchphrases. Vaccines are dangerous. The election was rigged. You need this to be happy. You scroll, you hear it again, you nod, until the line between truth and repetition blurs. Propaganda thrives on this. Say something loud enough, long enough, and people stop questioning it. Not because they've examined the logic, but because it feels familiar. It's why myths persist, misinformation spreads, and harmful ideas stay alive long after they're debunked. The illusory truth effect doesn't rely on logic. It exploits exposure. Your brain shortcuts deep thinking for recognition, and that makes it dangerous. The antidote is awareness. Don't trust a claim just because it feels familiar. Ask, Is it supported by evidence or just repeated a lot? Because real truth doesn't need to shout to be real. It just needs to survive inspection. In a world echoing with falsehoods, your mind's best defense is its ability to pause and question. Imagine someone knocks on your door and asks you to sign a petition. It's harmless, you agree. A week later, they return, this time asking for a donation. You say yes again. What just happened? That's the foot in the door technique. A small agreement primes your mind for a bigger one. Psychologists call it compliance through consistency. You want to feel logical, stable, aligned with your previous actions. So, saying yes once creates a chain reaction. Your identity subtly shifts. I'm the kind of person who helps. Now you're more likely to help again, even when the request grows. Salespeople use this to move from free samples to full purchases. Politicians use it to gain your initial support before pushing for deeper commitments. Even cults begin with something small: an event, a conversation, a simple favor. Once you've invested, walking away feels inconsistent. You're being nudged, not shoved, but it works. The foot in the door technique doesn't rely on force. It relies on who you think you are. The more steps you take, the harder it is to reverse course. You rationalize each decision to stay consistent. But consistency isn't always truth. Sometimes, it's just inertia wearing a mask. Awareness is your defense. Ask yourself, would I agree to this if it came first? If the answer is no, stop walking. Because being led step by step isn't just persuasion, it's control disguised as progress. Your freedom isn't in always saying yes, it's in knowing when to turn around. Pause. Choose. Don't be walked, walk away. Small steps lead somewhere. Make sure it's where you actually want to go. You are not obligated to finish a journey just because you took the first step. Reclaim the direction. Imagine holding a mug in your hand. It's plain, ceramic, nothing special. But now imagine someone offers to buy it. You hesitate. You want more than they're offering. Why? Because it's yours. That's the endowment effect. The bias that makes us overvalue what we own. Not because of its actual worth, but because we possess it. What if value isn't objective, but territorial? In a famous study, researchers gave mugs to one group of people and asked another group to bid on them. Owners wanted twice as much as buyers were willing to pay. Same mug. But the moment we own something, it gains emotional weight. It becomes part of us. We confuse attachment with value, possession with purpose. It shows up everywhere. You keep childhood toys you never touch, clothes that don't fit, and drawers full of outdated tech. Why? Because letting go feels like erasing history. We stay in jobs that drain us because we've already put in years. We hold grudges because we've carried them so long they feel like home. Ownership changes perception. Your car becomes the best. Your house becomes perfect. Your opinion becomes truth. You defend what's yours, even when it no longer serves you, even when it hurts you. But what if the real strength isn't in holding on, but in letting go? Ask yourself, would I fight to gain this, or only to keep it? Is it truly valuable, or just familiar? Freedom begins when you recognize the weight of what you carry and decide whether it still deserves a place in your hands. The endowment effect isn't love. It's illusion dressed as loyalty. Sometimes, the most powerful move is releasing what never truly belonged to you, because what you own isn't who you are, and letting go isn't losing. It's choosing what matters now. What if every choice you made was shaped more by feeling than by fact? Imagine hearing the word nuclear. Your heart rate spikes. Fear rushes in. Now imagine the word sunshine. You relax. Warmth rises. Neither word explains risk, but your emotions have already made the decision. That's the effect heuristic. When we let feelings, not logic, steer our judgment, this bias runs deeper than we realize. In one study, participants rated nuclear power as more dangerous after reading a negative article, even though the actual statistics hadn't changed. In another, people viewed skydiving as safer when shown smiling faces. The data remained the same, but emotion tipped the scale. Advertisers know this. Politicians use it. A smiling child, a tragic story, a powerful image. These aren't arguments. They're emotional levers. And once pulled, reason often follows rather than leads. Our brains are efficiency machines. Emotions act fast. Logic drags behind, rationalizing after the fact. But this shortcut has a price. It makes us overreact to rare threats and underestimate quiet ones. We fear plane crashes more than heart disease. We panic at headlines and ignore quiet warnings. We trust instincts shaped by fear and joy instead of evidence. Feelings can be wise, but they can also lie. Wisdom begins when we pause, when we ask, is this fear or fact? The affect heuristic whispers, but you can choose who speaks louder. And in that moment of awareness, you trade reflex for reason. You stop reacting. You start thinking. And in that stillness, you finally decide for yourself, not your feelings. Because true clarity isn't what you feel, it's what you face, even when emotion begs you not to. Imagine meeting someone with a dazzling smile, a sharp suit, and a charming tone. Instantly you think they're smart, kind, trustworthy, maybe even successful. But how do you know? You don't. You're in the grip of the halo effect, where one positive trait casts a glow over everything else. The brain takes a single impression and builds a whole person from it, skipping evidence and leaping to conclusions. This bias infects every corner of life. In courtrooms, attractive defendants receive lighter sentences. In job interviews, confident speakers get hired, even if they are less qualified. In school, students seen as well-behaved are rated as more intelligent. It's not fair, and it's not rational. But it feels right because the brain craves simplicity. It loves patterns. And the halo effect is its favorite illusion. Coined by psychologist Edward Thorndike in 1920, the term emerged from military studies. Soldiers who looked strong were rated as more intelligent and disciplined. It wasn't true, but perception became reality. The mind paints a complete portrait from a single stroke. Good looks mean good ethics. Politeness means competence. It's not logic, it's lazy association. This effect doesn't just shape how we see others, it shapes how society runs. We choose leaders based on image, not substance. We trust influencers because they're stylish, not wise. We follow confidence, not correctness. We mistake charm for character. And here's the danger. Halos blind us. They make us miss red flags. They turn charisma into credibility. But image isn't truth. So, next time someone shines bright in one area, pause. Ask, what am I not seeing? Because the brighter the halo, the darker the shadows it hides. Imagine making a difficult choice, and then, over time, reshaping your memories to defend it. That's the choice supportive bias, a cognitive illusion where you rewrite the past to make your decisions look better, even if they weren't. It's not just pride, it's protection. Your mind shields your identity from regret by editing the story you tell yourself. You choose a job over another. Months later, the stress, the commute, the red flags don't seem so bad. You highlight the positives, downplay the negatives. You say, it was the right choice, even if deep down, you still wonder. You forget why you hesitated, why you doubted, and replace uncertainty with a cleaner, more comfortable version of reality. Psychologists have studied this. People were asked to choose between similar options. Then later, their memories of the chosen option improved, while the rejected one worsened. They didn't just justify their decision. They altered their perception of reality to protect their self-image. This bias feels good, but it's dangerous. It traps us in loops of self-deception. It makes us loyal to bad investments, toxic relationships, flawed ideologies. We say, I made the best choice I could, not because it's true, but because we need it to be true. Our ego depends on it. Choice-supportive bias helps us feel confident, but it blocks growth. When we edit the past to escape regret, we rob ourselves of learning, of truth, of transformation. We cling to a polished lie instead of facing an imperfect truth. The cure is radical honesty, to say, I chose wrong, and that's okay. Because strength isn't in being right, it's in recognizing when you weren't. Only then can you change, only then can you improve, and only then does your past stop owning your future. Imagine sitting calmly, telling yourself you'll stay composed tomorrow. No anger, no panic, no craving. But when tomorrow comes and emotions surge, reason vanishes. That's the cold to hot empathy gap. It's the mind's failure to predict how deeply emotions will hijack logic. When you're in a cold state, calm, rational, you believe you'll handle stress, temptation, or fear with ease. But emotions change everything. Hunger turns resolve into indulgence. Anger turns diplomacy into aggression. Fear turns plans into paralysis. In studies, people who swore they'd never smoke again lit up as soon as cravings hit. Diabetics promised discipline until the cake was in front of them. You can't reason with a mind on fire using promises made in the cold. The gap blinds you to your future self's vulnerability. That's why preparing for emotion isn't about willpower, it's about systems. Want to resist rage? Set boundaries before it strikes. Want to eat better? Plan when you're full? Want to avoid regret? Decide before the pressure builds. The key isn't denying emotion, it's respecting its power. Build safeguards and peace so they hold when the storm hits. Your calm mind cannot imagine the chaos, but it can protect you from it. That's the difference between reacting and responding. Imagine you're choosing between two drinks. One is small and cheap, the other is large but expensive. You hesitate. But then, suddenly, a third option appears. Medium-sized, almost as pricey as the large one. Now the large option feels like a deal. You choose it. That's the decoy effect. When a strategically placed, less attractive third choice makes one of the other two suddenly seem more appealing. What if your preferences aren't really yours, but shaped by invisible comparisons? In a classic study, people were offered a small popcorn for $3 or a large for $7. Most chose the small. But when a medium for $6.50 was added, nearly everyone picked the large. The medium wasn't a real choice. It was bait. A psychological decoy meant to steer you without you realizing. This tactic is everywhere. Subscription services list 3 plans. The middle one is overpriced, weak. But it pushes you toward the premium. You feel like you're upgrading wisely. In politics, a third candidate can shift votes not by winning, but by making one of the others seem more reasonable. In real estate, you're shown a bad house first, so the next looks like a dream. Why does it work? Because the brain craves context. It doesn't ask, what do I want? It asks, what looks better? The decoy reframes the choice. You think you're in control, but the spotlight has already been moved. To resist it, step back. Imagine the decoy doesn't exist. Would your decision change? Are you choosing what's best, or what's been framed to feel right? Real choice doesn't live in comparison. It begins the moment you see the trick, and choose anyway. Because the strongest decision isn't the one that feels right. It's the one made after you've silenced the noise. Choice isn't real until you know what's pushing you. What if your greatest fear wasn't failure, but losing what you already had? Imagine this. You're offered a bet. A 50% chance to win $100. A 50% chance to lose $100. Most people say no. The odds are fair. But the emotion isn't. That's loss aversion. The idea that the pain of losing is about twice as powerful as the joy of gaining. This isn't just a theory. Psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky proved it through decades of research. In experiments, participants consistently needed to gain much more than they might lose to even consider a gamble. The loss stings more than the gain soothes. The mind weighs the negative heavier, even when the math is even. You see this in real life every day. Investors hold on to losing stocks, afraid to lock in a loss. People stay in bad relationships because walking away feels like giving up something. Businesses refuse to pivot, clinging to what they've already built, even when it no longer works. We don't just fear failure, we fear subtraction. We measure risk not in potential but in pain. But here's the truth. Holding on to avoid loss is its own kind of loss. You stay stuck. You resist change. You shrink from opportunity because risk feels like danger, even when it's potential. Loss aversion whispers, protect what's yours. But it never tells you what that protection costs. Courage isn't just chasing reward, it's being willing to let go, to risk discomfort, to choose growth over safety. You can't win if you're too afraid to lose. And sometimes, what you're clinging to is the very thing holding you back. Letting go isn't losing. It might be your first real win. Fear guards the gate, but beyond it is everything worth reaching for. Imagine you spend hours building a wobbly table. The legs don't quite match, the surface tilts, the instructions made you swear under your breath. It's uneven, frustrating, clearly not perfect. But to you, it's priceless. Why? Because you built it. This is the IKEA effect, a powerful psychological bias where we overvalue things we helped create, even when they are deeply flawed. Effort becomes emotion. Sweat becomes sentiment. Struggle becomes ownership. In 2011, researchers Dan Ariely, Michael Norton, and Daniel Mauchan proved it. In study after study, people were willing to pay significantly more for items they assembled themselves, compared to identical, factory-built versions. The final product wasn't better, but it felt better because labor attached meaning. Building something made it theirs, even if crooked. This isn't just about furniture. It explains why parents defend their children's amateur art like it belongs in a gallery. Why entrepreneurs refuse to abandon doomed business models they poured time into. Why we cling to clutter, broken ideas, even fading relationships. It's not logic, it's identity. We don't just love what we've made, we see ourselves in it. The IKEA effect taps into our deepest wiring, the desire to matter, to see impact. Building creates a bond. Crafting something, no matter how imperfect, feels like proof we exist, that we shaped the world in some small way. And the harder it was to build, the harder it is to let go. But there's a danger. That bond can trap us. We defend poor choices, not because they're right, but because we made them. So next time you're holding on to something just because you built it, stop. Ask, do I love this? Or do I just love that it's mine? Imagine standing on a high, swaying bridge. Your heart races, your palms sweat, your breath shortens, and then someone smiles at you. Suddenly you feel a spark. But is it real attraction? Or fear wearing a clever disguise? This is the bridge effect, a strange psychological twist, where fear and excitement blur into desire. We confuse physiological arousal, like adrenaline or anxiety, for emotional connection. In 1974, psychologists Donald Dutton and Arthur Aron conducted a landmark experiment. They sent male participants across two different bridges, one stable, the other wildly unstable, and suspended over a deep canyon. At the end, each man met an attractive woman who offered her number. The results? Men on the shaky bridge were far more likely to call her. Why? Because their bodies were flooded with adrenaline, and their brains mistook that internal storm for chemistry. But this phenomenon doesn't only exist on bridges. It happens during scary movies, intense workouts, first dates, even heated arguments. When your nervous system is firing, your brain scrambles to assign meaning to the sensation. If there's someone nearby, it pins the feeling to them. That flutter in your chest, it must be attraction. But it might just be fear in disguise. The bridge effect exposes how unreliable our feelings can be in high-stress moments. It explains whirlwind romances that fizzle fast, or why we feel bonded to someone we barely know after an intense experience. The cure, awareness. Take a breath. Ask yourself, am I drawn to them or to the adrenaline? True connection isn't built in chaos. It's proven in calm, because real love doesn't just spark when the heart races. It stays when the rush is gone. Imagine someone looks at you like you're destined for greatness, not because of what you've done, but because of what they believe you can do. Slowly you rise. That's the Pygmalion effect. When others expect more from you, your performance actually improves. It's not magic, it's psychology. In a famous experiment, teachers were told certain students were bloomers. The truth? Those students were chosen at random, but by the end of the year, they outperformed their peers. Why? The teachers believed in them, and that belief changed everything. How often they were called on, how much feedback they got, how warmly they were treated. Expectation shaped behavior, which shaped performance. This isn't just school, it's life. If your boss believes you're a leader, you step up. If your coach believes you're clutch, you rise in the final play. If someone believes you're a failure, it drags at your potential. You start believing it too. But here's the twist. You can reverse engineer it. Surround yourself with people who expect the best from you. Reflect that same belief onto others. A child, a partner, a teammate. Watch them rise under the weight of your confidence. And when doubt creeps in, borrow belief from someone who sees your future clearly. Even if you can't yet, you become what others believe you are. But more importantly, you become what you believe they believe. Imagine looking around and thinking everything is falling apart. The news is bleak. People seem colder. The world feels broken. But what if that feeling isn't reality, but a glitch in perception? This is decline bias, the belief that the world is getting worse, even when it's getting better. What if the good old days never existed the way you remember them? Studies show people consistently rate the past more favorably than the present, even when data proves otherwise. Crime is down. Poverty is shrinking. Life expectancy is up. But we still say, things used to be better. Why? Because fear burns deeper into memory than progress. In one study, people were shown neutral images mixed with negative and positive ones. Later, they recalled the negative ones most vividly. The brain is built to prioritize threats. Evolution wired us to notice what could harm us, not what helps us. And when media floods us with crises, tragedies, and outrage, decline becomes the story we believe, even when the facts say otherwise. This bias affects how we vote, how we parent, how we see strangers. It makes us think today's youth are lazier. Today's culture is emptier. Today's future is doomed. But every generation thinks that. In ancient Greece, elders complained about the young. In the 1800s, they feared the printing press would ruin society. Decline is a myth that repeats. To escape it, ask, am I reacting to facts or to fear? What does the data say? Not the headlines. The world isn't perfect. But it may be better than you think. Decline bias is a shadow, but progress is still happening, even if quietly. You're not living in the end times. You're living in a noisy world with a silent tide of progress. Look closer. It's not all decline. Sometimes it's just change. What if your emotions weren't as visible as you believed? Imagine standing in front of a crowd, your heart pounding, palms sweating. You're sure everyone can see how nervous you are, but they don't. This is the illusion of transparency, the false belief that our internal states leak out for everyone to read. In truth, we're more opaque than we think. This illusion was first explored by psychologists Gilovich, Savitsky, and Medvec. In one study, participants were asked to lie, while others judged whether they were telling the truth. Most liars thought they were obviously suspicious, but they were judged as truthful far more often than they expected. Our inner turmoil doesn't show on our faces nearly as much as we imagine. In another experiment, people gave public speeches and rated themselves as visibly anxious. Observers disagreed. They saw calm, composed speakers. What feels like a storm inside often looks like a breeze outside. That mismatch is the illusion at work. This bias fuels anxiety, self-consciousness, and even shame. We overestimate how much others notice our slip-ups, stumbles, or awkward moments. But the spotlight we feel isn't real. Others are too caught in their own worlds to track ours. Power comes from knowing this. You're not exposed, you're interpreted. And interpretation is noisy, flawed, human. The silence you dread, it's rarely judgment. The glance you fear, probably nothing. You're more hidden than you realize. And sometimes, that's a gift. Not invisibility, but freedom. The space to try, to fail, to be human, without believing everyone's watching. Because they're not. And that's how you grow. The world isn't staring at you. It's reflecting back what you believe about yourself. Imagine recalling a childhood memory. The smell of popcorn, a blue balloon, your cousin laughing as the dog knocked over the cake. You see it, you feel it. But it never happened. That's the false memory effect. When the mind fabricates events so vividly, they feel real. Your brain isn't trying to deceive you. It's trying to build a narrative you can live with. It fills gaps with details that feel right, even when they're not true. In 1995, psychologist Elizabeth Loftus conducted a study where participants were told they had been lost in a shopping mall as children. Many came to believe it. They remembered feelings, sights, even rescuers, none of which were real. This wasn't hypnosis or trickery. It was how memory works. Every time we recall something, we alter it. Memories aren't recordings. They're living reconstructions, built from fragments, shaped by time and emotion, and constantly rewritten by context. False memories don't just haunt the past, they infect the present. Eyewitnesses confidently report crimes that never occurred. Friends remember conversations that didn't happen. Families break over events remembered differently by each person. The emotional charge behind a memory often convinces us it must be accurate. But emotion isn't evidence, and confidence, it's often the biggest lie of all. The truth is, your brain favors coherence over correctness. It stitches feelings, impressions, and suggestions into a fact that fits, that explains, that soothes. But sometimes, that story never actually happened. So, next time you are absolutely sure of a memory, stop. Ask yourself, is it truth or is it narrative? Because your mind isn't a camera, it's a novelist, and the edits, they happen every time you turn the page. Imagine hearing about a plane crash, then swearing off flying, even though statistically, air travel is far safer than driving. That's base rate neglect, a psychological trap where vivid emotional stories overpower cold, hard data. We ignore general statistics, the base rates, and latch onto personal anecdotes, no matter how rare. And that bias warps how we see danger, risk, and truth. Picture this. A medical test is 95% accurate for a rare disease that affects just 1 in 10,000 people. You test positive. Panic sets in. But what are the actual odds you have it? Still under 1%, yet your brain screams otherwise. Why? Because it's not wired to do statistical reasoning. It's wired to react to fear, to act on emotion, to latch onto vivid outcomes instead of dull math. This bias is everywhere. We hear one horror story about a side effect and ignore thousands of successful cases. One crime report makes us afraid to walk outside, even though crime rates may be lower than ever. A celebrity wins the lottery, and suddenly we feel like we have a shot too. But in truth, we're gambling against logic itself and cheering for the odds to break in our favor. Base rate neglect explains everything from urban legends to conspiracy theories. It's why anti-science narratives spread, why media headlines mislead, and why we overestimate danger and underestimate safety. Anecdotes shout, statistics whisper, but only one speaks truth. The antidote is rational distance. Pause and ask, what are the odds? What does long-term data say, not short-term noise? Because wisdom doesn't come from what feels real, it comes from what is real. The base rate doesn't lie. But if we ignore it, we do, and often at great cost. Imagine thinking someone's rude because they didn't wave back. Maybe they're angry, or cold, or ignoring you. But what if they just didn't see you? That's projection bias. It's the tendency to assume others think, feel, and act like we do, even when they don't. Your mind defaults to itself. You use your own emotions, beliefs, and motivations as the template for everyone else's. You're hungry, so you assume others are. You're anxious, so you misread silence as tension. You're honest, so you don't see the lie. But here's the danger. The more you project, the more disconnected you become. You miss warning signs, you overlook needs, you build stories around people that reflect you, not them. You think someone's overreacting, because you wouldn't. You assume your friends want what you want, need what you need, dream what you dream. But people are not you. Their histories, insecurities, values, they twist everything you assume into something foreign. In relationships, projection breeds resentment. In leadership, it breeds failure. In empathy, it becomes misunderstanding. But there's a cure: curiosity. Ask instead of assuming. Observe instead of reflecting. People aren't mirrors. They're windows into different realities. The more you listen, the less you'll need to guess. And in that space, between assumption and attention, you'll finally see who they really are. Imagine doing something good, recycling, donating, helping a stranger. You feel proud. But then, later that day, you cheat on your diet, skip a workout, or lie about a small thing. And somehow, it feels justified. That's moral licensing. When one virtuous act gives you unconscious permission to do something questionable because you've earned it. What if being good isn't a straight line, but a balancing act in your mind? In one study, people who bought eco-friendly products were more likely to steal or cheat shortly afterward. In another, participants who affirmed their moral values were more prone to make unethical decisions. It wasn't conscious hypocrisy, it was subconscious compensation. The brain builds moral credit and spends it like currency. It shows up in daily life. You skip your run because you ate a salad. You gossip because you volunteered. You snap at someone because you were kind to someone else earlier. And it's not just personal. A corporation donates to charity while underpaying workers. A leader fights for one cause but excuses another injustice. One good deed becomes a license for harm. But integrity isn't about evening out a scorecard. Real morality isn't transactional, it's cumulative. To fight moral licensing, stop keeping moral tabs. Ask yourself, would this action still feel right if no one knew what I did earlier? Am I doing good to do good, or just to buy comfort for bad? True character is forged in repetition, not one right thing, but choosing right again and again and again. Being good once doesn't cancel being cruel later. Kindness isn't a ticket, it's a path. Stay on it, even when no one claps. Because real goodness doesn't ask for reward. It doesn't trade, it doesn't negotiate. It just keeps showing up when it matters most. What if your judgment wasn't shaped by truth, but by what happened last? Imagine watching a job interview. The first candidate impresses you, the second one is average, but the third, decent and recent. When asked later, you rate them the best. Not because they were, but because they were last. That's recency bias, the tendency to weigh the most recent information more heavily, even when it's less relevant. It's not just memory, it's distortion. In a study, participants who watched a series of speeches rated the final speaker as more persuasive, simply because they went last. In another, students remembered the final words in a list more than the first, even when the beginning had stronger content. The most recent input overshadows what came before. Recency masks quality. In real life, it shapes everything. A bad ending ruins a great film. A last-minute compliment softens months of criticism. One harsh email can outweigh a year of kindness. We treat the end as the essence, when it's often just timing. The brain craves the latest, but the latest isn't always the truest. Media thrives on it. Headlines scream today's outrage, burying yesterday's facts. Social feeds reward the now, not the nuanced. You forget the long arc of truth, pulled by the gravity of recency. Clarity comes when we zoom out, when we remember that the newest detail isn't always the most truthful. Wisdom means weighing the whole timeline, not just the last scene, because the final word isn't always the full story. Sometimes, it's just the echo that came after. Truth isn't what shouts loudest, it's what endures when the noise fades. Memory is not reality, it's edited by recency. Imagine staring at a glowing screen at 3 a.m., eyes heavy, thoughts fuzzy. You know you should sleep, but you don't. You decide to keep working, send the message, make the purchase. And in that moment, you feel oddly sure, certain even. But that confidence is a lie. Welcome to sleep deprivation bias, where tired brains overestimate their clarity, underestimate risks, and make decisions they'd never make well rested. In 2007, scientists at Duke University discovered something unsettling. Sleep-deprived people not only made riskier decisions, they felt better about them. Brain scans showed decreased activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for judgment, and heightened activity in the reward centers. Fatigue didn't dull their impulses, it lit them up. The tired brain becomes a gambler. Bold, impulsive, convinced it's seeing clearly through a fog it can't recognize. Sleep loss mimics intoxication. After 20 hours awake, your cognitive function drops to the level of a drunk driver. You take shortcuts. You misread cues. You miss emotional nuance. And worst of all, you feel strangely confident while doing it. That false clarity is what makes sleep deprivation bias so dangerous. You don't feel impaired. You feel decisive, certain, ready. And that illusion of readiness invites catastrophe. From medical errors to financial missteps, disasters often follow tired minds pretending to be sharp. Pilots, doctors, CEOs, none are immune. The body is screaming for rest, but the brain, fueled by stress and adrenaline, charges forward blind. And in that blind rush, damage happens. Decisions are made that can't be undone. So, next time you're exhausted but convinced you're making the right call, pause. Ask, would I trust this choice if I were rested? Because tired minds are confident liars, and sleep isn't weakness. It's your brain's most honest advisor. Imagine trying to explain a song by tapping its rhythm on a table. You hear the melody in your head, but the listener hears only random knocks. When they don't guess it, you're stunned. How could you not get it? That's the curse of knowledge. Once you know something, it becomes incredibly hard to remember what it was like not to know it. Your expertise becomes your blindfold. This cognitive bias impacts everyone: teachers, managers, designers, scientists, even parents. When you've mastered a skill or learned a truth, your brain rewires. The knowledge becomes automatic. It feels obvious, effortless. But when you try to teach it, you skip steps, use jargon, or assume others already understand. The gap between your mind and theirs vanishes in your eyes, but not theirs. In a 1990 Stanford study, participants tapped out songs like Happy Birthday on a table while others tried to guess the tune. The tappers believed half the songs would be recognized. In reality, only 1 in 40 was. Why? Because once you know the tune, you can't unhear it. You expect others to hear what you do, because your mind has filled in the blanks. This bias causes friction in education, in business, and in life. Software becomes unusable because developers can't imagine being a beginner. Medical advice confuses patients because doctors forget how foreign the language sounds. Even in relationships, we get frustrated when others don't just know what we mean. The curse of knowledge isn't about arrogance, it's about forgetting. And the cure is empathy. Slow down. Break it down. Reconnect with the struggle of not knowing. Because true wisdom isn't just understanding, it's remembering what it took to get there, and then guiding someone else through the dark. Imagine you're in a plane, and the captain says everything is fine, but your gut says otherwise. Do you speak up? Most don't. That's the authority gradient. The greater the gap in perceived power, the less likely we are to challenge decisions, even when they're clearly flawed. It happens in hospitals, where nurses hesitate to question doctors. In offices, where juniors stay silent as managers steer projects off course. In the military, where following orders often overrides moral judgment. Our brains equate rank with truth. We confuse confidence with correctness, rank with reliability, and that deference can become dangerous. In aviation disasters, black box recordings have captured co-pilots noticing problems, but saying nothing. Why? Because the voice of authority drowns out their doubt. But this silence isn't just deadly in cockpits. It echoes in every hierarchy. The fix isn't rebellion, it's responsibility. Leaders must invite dissent. Followers must learn that respect includes raising concern. Flattening the gradient doesn't mean disrespect, it means courage. In one study, when hospitals trained staff to speak up regardless of rank, patient outcomes improved. In organizations that encourage questions, innovation rises. And in your own life, that same courage matters. Speak not because you're certain, but because silence can cost more than discomfort. The world doesn't need louder leaders. It needs braver followers. Authority doesn't make someone right, and doubt doesn't make you wrong. Your voice can be the difference. Use it, especially when it shakes. Imagine investing time, money, or emotion into something. A relationship, a job, a project. It's not working. The signs are clear, but instead of letting go, you push harder. You try again. You pour in more, not because it's smart, but because you already poured in so much. That's escalation of commitment. When we keep doubling down on bad decisions just to avoid admitting they were bad in the first place, what if persistence isn't always strength, but fear in disguise? In one study, participants were asked to manage a failing business. Those who had invested the most were the least likely to walk away, even when the numbers screamed disaster. It's not logic, it's ego. The more you give, the harder it is to stop giving. Because stopping feels like surrender. It's everywhere. The gambler throwing good money after bad, the entrepreneur who won't abandon a broken product, the partner who stays in a relationship that's become a battlefield. We tell ourselves, I've already sacrificed too much to stop now, but sometimes that's the most dangerous thought of all. Escalation of commitment traps us inside our own effort. It turns loss into identity. It weaponizes hope. We mistake inertia for loyalty, but loyalty to a bad decision is still a bad decision. To escape it, ask, if I could start fresh, would I choose this again? Or am I only staying because I already stayed this long? Walking away doesn't erase your effort. It honors it by refusing to waste more. Quitting isn't weakness, it's courage. It's the moment you choose truth over pride. And sometimes, the bravest move isn't fighting harder. It's knowing when to put the sword down and walk away free. Because no matter how far you've gone down the wrong road, turning back is still progress. The end of one path can be the start of something far better. What if your fear of the worst made you blind to what could go right? Imagine you're waiting for test results. One voice says, maybe it's nothing. But another voice, louder, colder, says, it's probably bad. That second voice? That's pessimism bias, the tendency to overestimate the likelihood of negative outcomes, even when the facts suggest otherwise. It's not just worry, it's neurological. Brain scans show the amygdala becomes hyperactive when imagining potential threats. This makes evolutionary sense, better to expect danger than ignore it. But today, that instinct distorts reality. It exaggerates risk. It whispers that hope is naive, and the more you listen, the more you believe. In one study, people were asked to predict future events in their lives. Those with pessimism bias consistently underestimated their odds of success, even when their track records said otherwise. They assumed failure, prepared for disaster, and often, They talk themselves into giving up before they began. This bias fuels anxiety and steals momentum. We don't apply for jobs because we assume rejection. We don't open up in relationships because we expect heartbreak. We avoid risks that could bring joy because fear feels safer than disappointment. But in trying to avoid pain, we often guarantee regret. Because safety isn't peace, it's paralysis. The world isn't as cruel as pessimism claims. Good outcomes are just as possible. You just have to believe in them long enough to act, to risk looking foolish, to try. Because hope isn't weakness, it's rebellion. It's choosing light when darkness seems logical. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is expect the best anyway. Imagine getting a raise, $1,000 more a month. You feel wealthier, safer, more successful. You start planning a vacation, maybe upgrading your apartment. But if prices around you rise faster, did you really gain anything? That's the money illusion. Your brain thinks in absolute dollars, not real value. It celebrates numbers and ignores purchasing power. And in a world shaped by inflation, that illusion can quietly erode your financial reality. Economists have warned about this for over a century. Irving Fisher coined the term in 1928. People resist adjusting their thinking to account for inflation. A worker who gets a 2% raise in a year with 3% inflation feels richer, despite being poorer in real terms. Why? Because we're wired to feel progress through bigger numbers, not through deeper context. The illusion is comforting. It tells us we're moving forward, even when we're sliding backward. In a 1997 study, Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman showed how people preferred a nominal raise over a real one. They'd rather earn $60,000 in a $40,000 economy than $50,000 in a $30,000 economy, even though the latter has more actual buying power. It's not logic, it's perception. And that perception drives financial behavior, how we save, spend, invest, and vote. Money illusion impacts wages, contracts, retirement plans, and long-term decisions. It makes you feel you're winning when you're actually falling behind. You celebrate the bigger paycheck, but ignore that rent, groceries, gas, and utilities just stole it back. The illusion comforts you with growth, but hides the erosion beneath. So, next time you see your salary rise or a price drop, pause. Ask, what's the value, not the number? Because numbers lie when stripped from context. And true wealth isn't how much you make, it's what your money can still buy. What if you expected someone to read your mind, and when they didn't, you felt betrayed? That's the clairvoyant fallacy. It's the invisible battlefield where relationships die quietly. You believe, if they really love me, they'd know. But how? Minds are not mirrors. Hearts don't come with subtitles. And silence, no matter how loud it feels inside, remains just that. Silence. Imagine you're drowning in plain sight, reaching out without moving a muscle. You stare, hoping someone sees the scream behind your eyes. When they don't, rage blooms. But did you ever say a word? This is the paradox. We crave understanding without vulnerability, connection without exposure. And so, we punish people for failing to guess the depths we never dared to share. In love, they should know I'm hurting. In family, they should just sense it. In work, they must see I'm burnt out. But psychological research shows the opposite. People dramatically underestimate your inner world. The illusion of transparency makes you think you're broadcasting emotion. But really, you're wrapped in fog. You think you're protecting yourself by not asking, but you're only building a wall. Every unmet need turns to bitterness. Every silence becomes a story. They don't care. But maybe they would, if they knew. What if instead we spoke, even shakily? Because clarity is an act of love. No one is born a mind reader, but most people, if invited, will listen. Imagine reading this sentence. He had had enough. Did you notice the repetition? Or did your brain skip it? That's repetition blindness. It's not a glitch in your eyes, it's a feature of your brain. When identical words appear too close together, your mind merges them as one. It assumes you've seen it before, so it skips it. This happens in milliseconds. Your brain, trying to optimize speed and efficiency, removes what it believes is redundant. But that shortcut creates blind spots. You've probably read signs that say the, but only noticed one. In one study, people were shown sentences with repeated words and asked to recall them. Over half failed to detect the duplicate. This bias isn't about language, it's about perception. Your mind builds meaning by prediction, not observation. It fills in gaps and shaves off repeats. In daily life, this means you might miss a warning, overlook a detail, ignore a red flag, simply because it was shown twice. The danger isn't in what you don't see, it's in what you thought you saw. Repetition blindness affects everything from proofreading to memory recall to eyewitness testimony. We trust our perception, but forget how edited it is. But in skipping, we sometimes lose meaning. Repetition is often emphasis, a warning, a sign, and when we miss it, we miss intention. Train your attention to slow down, because sometimes what you think you've already seen is what you needed most to notice. Imagine a doctor tells you something, but you instantly doubt it. A scientist shares facts, but you feel suspicious. A leader gives advice, and you instinctively rebel. Not because they're wrong, but because they're in charge. That's authority bias reversal. The reflex to reject authority simply because it's authority. A defense mechanism disguised as independence. What if defiance isn't always clarity, but trauma in disguise? After being misled, manipulated, or controlled, the mind overcorrects. It flips from blind obedience to blanket distrust. You stop evaluating what's said and focus only on who said it. And if that person holds power, you reject them, on principle. In studies on psychological reactance, people resist rules more when they feel their freedom is threatened. Even helpful instructions trigger rebellion, not because of content, but control. The moment something feels imposed, we push back, even if it's in our best interest. It shows up in medicine. Patients refuse treatment just because a doctor recommended it. In education, students ignore teachers out of pride. In politics, people vote against their own well-being to spite those in power. Authority becomes the enemy, even when it's right. But truth doesn't care who speaks it. Rejecting wisdom just because it wears a badge, a lab coat, or a title isn't strength, it's reflex. And reflex isn't reason. To escape it, ask, if this advice came from someone I admire, would I believe it? Would I reject this if I weren't angry at who's speaking? Because real freedom isn't just saying no to power, it's choosing when to say yes, on your terms. Wisdom doesn't need a crown to be true, and rebellion isn't freedom if it blinds you to what's right. Pause, think, choose, not as a reaction, but as a response. That's real power. What if the story you believe is only half the truth? Imagine reading about a billionaire who dropped out of college and built an empire. It sounds inspiring, but what about the thousands who dropped out and failed? You never hear about them. That's survivorship bias, the mistake of focusing on the visible winners while ignoring the countless invisible failures. It distorts how we judge risk, reward, and reality. During World War II, engineers studied bullet holes on returning aircraft to reinforce the most hit areas. But statistician Abraham Wald pointed out the flaw. Those planes survived. The missing data, the planes that didn't come back, told the real story, reinforced where the bullet holes weren't. This bias infects everything. We study successful businesses without analyzing the startups that went bankrupt. We idolize famous artists and ignore the gifted ones who died unknown. We see gym influencers and forget those who tried the same routines and got hurt or gave up. We call it proof, but it's just visibility. Survivorship bias builds false hope. It tells you success is common if you just hustle harder. It makes failure feel like weakness when it's often just statistics. Most don't make it, not because they didn't try, but because the system buries the bodies of effort. And when those voices vanish, we mistake silence for success. Truth begins when you see the whole field, not just the winners still standing. Success is real, but it's rare. Don't just ask, what did they do right? Ask, who did the same and vanished? Because the full truth isn't in the spotlight. It's in the shadows too. If you only study those who made it, you'll never understand why so many didn't. Imagine standing at a slot machine. You pull the lever with just the right grip. You wait for a specific moment. Maybe you whisper a phrase for luck. Deep down, you feel like you're influencing the outcome, but you're not. That's the illusion of control, when we believe our actions impact results that are truly random. It's false confidence, but it feels good. So we believe it again and again. In 1975, psychologist Ellen Langer showed how deeply this bias runs. She gave people lottery tickets, some randomly assigned, others self-selected. Those who picked their own were less willing to trade, even for better odds. Their choice gave them a sense of ownership, and that ownership sparked an illusion of power. The numbers didn't matter. The control did. We see this everywhere. A basketball player wears lucky socks. A driver avoids a certain lane. A traveler repeats a ritual before flying. You press close door in the elevator, even when it's not wired to respond. The brain isn't stupid, it's anxious. And fake control is a soothing lie. The mind fears randomness. It wants cause and effect, input and result. Control is how we defend against chaos. So we create patterns. We assign meaning. We imagine we're driving when we're only along for the ride. And sometimes that illusion keeps us sane, but it has a cost. It leads us to overestimate our influence. It tricks us into blame or guilt when things go wrong. It pushes us into magical thinking. So, next time you feel the need to do something to change what you can't control, pause. Ask, is this real power or a comfort mechanism dressed as logic? Because letting go doesn't mean giving up. Sometimes, it's how you move forward with clarity, without needing to control the wind. What if taste wasn't just on your tongue, but in your mind? That's the secret behind taste expectation bias. When you believe something should taste better, because of price, label, setting, it often does. Not because the flavor changed, but because your brain did. Perception isn't passive. It's an active, biased storyteller, rewriting reality in real time. Imagine 2 glasses of wine, same vineyard, same bottle. One labeled $12, the other one $120. You taste both. Most say the expensive one is smoother, more refined, even magical. But it's the same wine. This isn't just snobbery, it's science. Studies using fMRI reveal that the brain's pleasure center becomes more active when people believe something is expensive. You don't just think it tastes better, you feel that it does. Stanford and Caltech researchers proved this. Price tags altered people's experience, not metaphorically, neurologically. Even wine experts fell for it. The mind doesn't just interpret flavor, it fabricates it. Your taste buds may start the story, but your beliefs finish it. This bias reaches far beyond wine. Generic cereal tastes duller. Brand name medicine feels stronger. A $100 meal served with style tastes better than the same dish at home. Our brains fill in the blanks with luxury, status, and story. We don't just taste, we narrate. We don't just consume, we believe. And in that belief, the ordinary transforms into the extraordinary. So ask yourself, when something tastes divine, is it truly flavor or fiction? Is it richness or reputation? In the theater of the mind, belief is the chef, memory is the seasoning, and the label. That's the illusion we savor like truth, one delicious lie at a time. Imagine seeing a warning light on your dashboard and covering it with tape so you don't have to deal with it. That's the ostrich effect. When faced with negative information, we sometimes choose to ignore it entirely. We bury our heads, hoping that if we don't look, it'll disappear. But problems don't vanish in the dark. In finance, investors avoid checking their portfolios during downturns. In health, people delay test results out of fear. In relationships, we pretend silence means peace. But avoidance feels safe. It feels easier. But it's dangerous. The longer we look away, the deeper the damage grows. The brain is wired to minimize discomfort. So it tricks us. Don't open that message, don't ask that question, don't check the result. We silence curiosity when truth threatens comfort. But truth doesn't wait. It sharpens, it spreads, it compounds. In science, in strategy, in life, timely feedback is everything. Ignoring bad news doesn't protect you from pain. It delays it and often multiplies it. Confronting the problem is the first step to controlling it. One study showed that people who faced medical diagnoses early, even when it hurt, had better long-term outcomes. The same holds true in business, love, and self-growth. The earlier you look, the more power you have to act. Denial is comforting, but action is healing. So next time the light flashes, resist the urge to look away. Lift your head. Face the data. The pain you're avoiding is already happening. The only question is, will you lead it or let it grow in your blind spot? Ignoring truth won't shield you from it. Reality doesn't pause for comfort. It demands attention. So don't look away. Look closer. Imagine you walk into a store. You see 2 brands of the same product. One is sleek, new, unknown. The other, familiar colors, a friendly logo, maybe even a memory attached. You reach for the one that feels right. Not because it's better, but because it feels warmer. That's the warm glow heuristic. When we rate emotionally positive or familiar options as better, even if they are less effective, less logical, or less true. What if your choices aren't always reasoned, but remembered? In one study, participants rated charities with heartwarming names and visuals as more trustworthy, even when they accomplished less. The emotional pull of kindness, nostalgia, and warmth clouded their judgment, and it happens constantly. You vote for the politician with a smile and a slogan. You pick the cereal from your childhood. You believe the message that feels good over the one that feels hard. You're not just thinking, you're feeling. And feelings shape decisions faster than facts ever could. The warm glow. Heuristic makes us trust what's soft, familiar, and safe, but it can blind us. We ignore better options because they're unfamiliar. We resist truths because they're uncomfortable. We choose comfort over clarity. Marketers use this. Politicians exploit it. Our brains lean into it because warmth feels like safety. But not all comfort leads to truth. To resist it, ask, do I prefer this because it's right or because it's familiar? What would I choose if I'd never seen it before? Truth doesn't always glow. Sometimes it challenges, sometimes it hurts. But it's still truth. Warmth can guide you, but don't let it blind you. Real wisdom isn't what feels good. It's what holds up when feelings fade. What if the same mistake looked unforgivable on someone else, but understandable on you? Imagine a driver cuts you off in traffic. You mutter, "What a reckless jerk." But when you do it, "I didn't see them, I was in a hurry." That double standard? It's not hypocrisy, it's the actor-observer bias, the tendency to judge others based on what they do, but judge ourselves based on what we meant. You see their actions, but you feel your own intentions. When someone snaps at you, they're rude. When you snap, it's because you had a rough day. When they forget a birthday, they don't care. When you forget, you were overwhelmed. We assume context for ourselves and character for others, and we rarely stop to consider the reverse. In a classic study, participants watched a conversation. If they saw someone else speaking, they assumed personality explained behavior. But if they were the speaker, they blamed the situation. Perspective changes everything, and we rarely question it. Our judgments become rigid while our self-justifications remain fluid. This bias affects friendships, workplaces, relationships. Everywhere people collide. It breeds resentment and misunderstanding. We're quicker to assign blame than ask questions, quicker to accuse than to empathize. And the gap between how we act and how we see others grows until connection collapses. But what if we flip the lens? What if we gave others the same benefit of the doubt we give ourselves? What if their actions were driven by reasons we don't see, because chances are they are? And when we start assuming context instead of character, we don't just become fairer, we become wiser. That shift is where understanding begins. Imagine going on a vacation. Most days are average. One day is breathtaking, a perfect view, a moment of awe. Another ends in frustration, maybe a missed flight or an argument. When you return home, what do you remember most? Not the entire trip, just the peak and the end. That's the peak-end rule, a cognitive shortcut where we judge an experience not by its full duration, but by its most intense moment and its final one. Psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Barbara Fredrickson discovered this in the 1990s. In one study, patients underwent 2 uncomfortable procedures. One ended quickly, the other lasted longer, but finished on a slightly less painful note. Strangely, patients preferred the longer, more painful version because it ended better. The final moment shaped their memory more than the total discomfort. The pain was real, but the memory was rewritten by how it ended. This bias shapes how we recall movies, meals, vacations, jobs, and relationships. A mediocre concert with a killer finale feels unforgettable. A relationship full of good moments can be tainted in your memory by a harsh goodbye. A job you quietly endured for years might seem worse if it ended in conflict. The brain doesn't record time like a tape. It edits experiences into stories, and the most emotional points become bookmarks. The peak-end rule helps us make fast judgments, but it also distorts truth. It compresses life into highlight reels and closing credits. You forget the full arc, the quiet, the steady, the meaningful middle. And that distortion shapes what we seek and what we avoid. So next time you look back on something, good or bad, pause. Ask, am I remembering the whole or just the most? Because how something ends can blind you to everything that came before. And sometimes, the middle held the real meaning all along. What if your memory didn't care how long something lasted? That's duration neglect, the brain's strange habit of ignoring time when recalling experiences. Instead of tracking hours, it captures intensity, moments of peak emotion, how it ended, not how long it took. Imagine two vacations. One lasts 2 weeks, filled with mostly calm, beautiful days, but ends with stress, rain, and a canceled flight. The other lasts 5 days, hectic, but ending with a breathtaking sunset and laughter. Years later, which do you cherish more? Likely the shorter one. Why? Because your brain compresses experience into key emotional notes, highs and lows, especially how it ends. The same rule governs pain. In a famous study, patients undergoing a painful procedure rated it less unpleasant when it ended gently, even if it lasted longer. A sharper but shorter version with a sudden stop felt worse. Your mind didn't measure the minutes. It remembered the emotional peak and the final sensation. This bias affects everything: relationships, performances, careers. A long romance soured at the end is remembered more for its collapse than its warmth. A film's final scene can redeem or destroy everything that came before. The passage of time becomes irrelevant. Memory cares about meaning, not measurement. Duration fades. Emotion crystallizes deeply. So, when you live your life, ask yourself, not just how long something lasts, but how it feels at its most powerful and how it ends. Because when memory rewrites time, it's not the clock that survives. It's the echo, the final chord your soul can't forget, the note that keeps ringing long after the moment is gone, reshaping how you remember the whole tale. Imagine looking up at the clouds and seeing a face staring back at you, or scanning lottery numbers and thinking a pattern must be there. That's the clustering illusion. Your brain is a pattern-making machine. It evolved to find connections even when none exist. In nature, seeing a pattern could mean survival, spotting movement in tall grass, hearing rhythm in chaos. But today, that instinct tricks us. We see clusters and randomness and believe they're meaningful. In sports, people believe in hot streaks. In markets, investors chase streaks that don't exist. In everyday life, we notice coincidences and invent cause. A friend texts just as you think of them. You see 11:11 on the clock. You win a game 3 times and call it luck or fate. But randomness clusters. That's its nature. True randomness isn't spaced evenly. It clumps, swirls, duplicates, and your brain, desperate for control, says, there must be a reason. But there isn't. Not always. Sometimes the face in the cloud is just vapor. Sometimes patterns are just noise. Knowing the difference, that's clarity. That's power. Imagine you're offered 2 options. One eliminates a small risk entirely. The other reduces several bigger risks, but not to zero. Logically, the second is better, but your mind clings to the first. That's zero-risk bias, the irrational preference to eliminate one small danger completely, even if it means ignoring more significant ones. It feels safer, but it isn't. What if safety isn't your real goal, just the illusion of control? In one study, people chose to eliminate a 5% risk entirely rather than reduce a 40% risk to 20%. Mathematically, it made no sense. But psychologically, 0 felt like certainty, and certainty calms fear, even when it leads us to worse outcomes. This bias hides in everyday life. You pick a chemical-free cleaner while ignoring the processed food on your plate. You obsess over an ingredient linked to a 0.1% risk, but ignore the habit that raises another risk by 30%. You choose the 0 because it feels like power. It feels like a win. We're wired for it. Evolution taught us to run from predators, not calculate probabilities. So now we seek total elimination of threats, because any leftover risk feels like failure. But perfection is a myth, and chasing it can blind us to better, more balanced choices. Zero-risk bias is comfort disguised as strategy. But safety isn't the absence of risk. It's the wisdom to manage it wisely. To fight it, ask, if I wasn't promised 0, what would I choose? What actually makes me safer? Because sometimes clinging to 0 means you miss the real danger standing just beyond it. The world doesn't deal in absolutes. Risk is part of life. Wisdom isn't eliminating all of it. It's knowing which ones are worth taking and which ones aren't worth fearing. What if numbers didn't move you, but a single face could break your heart? Imagine hearing about a famine, 10,000 dead. You feel sad, but distant. Now imagine hearing about one girl, Rokia, starving in a refugee camp. her photo, her name, her story. Suddenly you care, you ache. That's the identifiable victim effect. We respond more to one name than to thousands of lives. It's not logical, it's emotional. In a groundbreaking study, people were asked to donate. One group saw statistics, millions in need. Another saw a photo and bio of a single child. The second group donated more, every time. Even when the crisis was the same, the brain processes individuals with empathy. But mass suffering, it blurs. It becomes background noise. This bias explains why charities show faces, not charts. Why one trapped miner gets global attention while entire war zones fade from view. Why we cry for one kidnapped girl, but scroll past a genocide. The mind's spotlight is narrow, and emotion lives where the light touches. We connect to stories, not spreadsheets. But here's the problem. This effect skews our moral compass. It makes us generous, but inconsistent. We spend millions to save one child trapped in a well, but hesitate to fund vaccines that could save thousands. One life feels real, a statistic feels fake, but the pain is the same. Numbers don't numb us, they just never had a face. Compassion must evolve. It's not wrong to cry for one. But we must learn to care for the many, to humanize the faceless, to let logic guide empathy, not silence it. Because every number is a name you just haven't learned yet. Every dot on a chart is a heartbeat waiting to be seen. Imagine your neighbor's house is on fire. You drop everything to help. But on the same day, thousands die in a flood halfway across the world, and you barely blink. This isn't cruelty. It's local bias, the tendency to prioritize nearby problems, even when distant ones are more urgent. Proximity distorts urgency. What's close feels real. What's far feels abstract. And in our modern world, that distortion shapes everything, from our empathy to our actions. Psychologists have studied this for decades. Our brains evolved in tribal environments, small groups, tight geography, immediate threats. The result? We're wired to react to what's around us. The closer the danger, the louder the alarm. Distance dulls emotion. Studies show people donate more to one suffering child nearby than to thousands far away. Even when the numbers scream louder, our empathy whispers in proximity. It's not just who suffers, it's where they suffer. In 2011, a study published in Psychological Science found that people were significantly more likely to help when the victim was spatially closer, even if the need was objectively less. The emotional response was tied not to severity, but to nearness. And in a globalized world, that glitch has real consequences. It decides which crisis gets headlines, which tragedy gets funds, and which voices go unheard. Local bias affects policy, aid, and attention. We panic over a virus outbreak in our city, but ignore a famine overseas. We fund repairs for our street while ignoring collapsing infrastructure in another country. We react, not based on scale, but on location. This bias doesn't mean we're heartless. It means we're human. But awareness is the antidote. So, next time you care deeply about a nearby crisis, pause. Ask, is this the most urgent need, or just the closest one? Because distance should never decide who gets help. Truth should. What if the way you see every problem is dictated by the tools in your hand? That's tool bias. When you have a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. If you're a coder, you build apps to fix human problems. If you're a cop, you see threats where others see pain. The tools we use become lenses, distorting more than clarifying. And when your lens is fixed, your reality becomes limited and misleading. Imagine a broken chair. A carpenter sees glue and clamps. A designer sees aesthetics. A manager sees a purchasing decision. It's the same chair, but different realities. Tool bias makes us treat problems as puzzles we already know how to solve, but the right tool in the wrong situation, that's not a solution. It's damage in disguise, precision applied to the wrong target. This bias lives in every field. Doctors overprescribe pills. Managers use data to treat burnout. Governments apply force to fix systemic trust. Not because they're wrong, but because their tools are loud, familiar, and ready. And so, the real problem remains untouched, misdiagnosed, mistreated. Your brain does it too. Rational thinkers ignore feelings. Empaths distrust structure. We cling to what we've mastered, and in doing so, we limit what we can change. Tool bias isn't just a habit, it's a trap. It narrows perception. It overvalues comfort. And worst of all, it feels like expertise. So, ask yourself, Is this the right tool or just the only one you trust? Because sometimes the bravest act isn't solving the problem. It's admitting your solution might be part of it and letting go. In that surrender, you finally see what you've been missing all along. New tools, new truths, better change begins now. Imagine hearing about a stranger who got into a car crash. You might think, they must have been careless. But if it happened near your home, on a road you drive every day, your mind softens. That shift is defensive attribution. It's the brain's way of protecting you from fear. When something bad happens to someone else, you either blame them or you see yourself in them. And that decision changes everything. If their fate feels distant, blame comes easy. But if you think it could happen to you, you empathize. You begin to make room for complexity. You see their panic, their distraction, their very human mistake. Because blaming creates distance, and distance feels safe. But closeness makes it real. In psychology studies, people blamed victims more harshly when the scenarios was unlikely to happen to them. But when the same situation hit close to home, their judgment softened. Why? Because if the victim is like us, then the world is less controllable, less fair, more terrifying. Blame becomes a shield, but compassion asks for courage. It means admitting that bad things can happen even to good, careful people, even to you, even to me. Defensive attribution isn't about logic. It's about self-preservation. But if we always choose distance, we lose our connection. We fail to grow. The challenge is to hold both truths, that people make choices and that misfortune isn't always earned, to see without flinching, to feel without fleeing. That's empathy. That's maturity. That's where humanity begins. Real safety comes not from blaming others, but from understanding them. The more we see ourselves in each other, the less we need to protect our egos, and the more we start protecting each other. Imagine you believe something deeply, about your country, your beliefs, your purpose. Then new facts emerge. Data contradicts your view, but instead of changing your mind, you dig in. You feel attacked, not because the facts are flawed, but because your identity is. That's the curse of identity bias, the tendency to resist new information when your beliefs are fused with who you are. What if you're not defending truth, but protecting your reflection? In studies, when people were shown evidence against their political beliefs, their brains responded not like thinkers, but like fighters. The amygdala lit up, emotion surged, reason dimmed. The brain treats identity threats like physical ones. You're not just wrong, you feel erased, so you double down. Facts become enemies. Logic becomes betrayal. You don't shift your stance, you fortify it. And the smarter you are, the better you get at defending the lie. This is why debates rarely work, why families break over beliefs, why people cling to broken ideologies, outdated traditions, disproven claims, not because they don't understand, but because understanding would unravel who they think they are. You can see it in religion, in politics, in culture wars, in science denial, in the refusal to admit you've changed, because to do so means you were wrong. But being wrong isn't weakness. Staying wrong out of fear is. The more your belief becomes your brand, the harder it is to evolve. But identity isn't truth, it's a story, and stories can grow. To break free, ask, if I wasn't raised to believe this, would I believe it now? If someone else said this, would I question them or myself? Growth doesn't mean betrayal, it means rewriting. And sometimes, rewriting yourself is the bravest thing you can do. Because truth doesn't destroy identity, it refines it. What if your heart didn't know the difference between fear and love? Imagine walking across a shaky suspension bridge. Your pulse is racing. You meet someone at the other side. You smile, they smile, and suddenly you feel a spark. But is it attraction or adrenaline? That confusion? It's called misattribution of arousal, when your body reacts one way and your brain assigns the wrong emotion to it. This phenomenon was famously studied in 1974. Male participants crossed either a stable bridge or a high, wobbly one. At the end, a woman gave them her number. Those who crossed the scary bridge were far more likely to call her later. The fear had been misread as desire. Same body signals, different story. That's how emotion disguises itself. Your body doesn't label emotions. It pumps chemicals, raises your heart rate, sharpens focus. It's your brain that decides what you're feeling. But sometimes, it guesses wrong. That racing heart from a horror movie, You might mistake it for attraction, that rush before public speaking. It can feel like panic or power, depending on what you believe. This bias shapes first dates, interviews, performances, even arguments. You feel something intense, but the label you choose changes everything. And in that moment, you build a memory that might be wrong. A crush born of fear. A fear born of anticipation. A truth you never questioned. But there's power in knowing this. You can pause. Rethink. Ask, is this really what I feel, or just what it reminds me of? Because feelings aren't facts, they're guesses. And when you learn to decode them, you stop being controlled by your chemistry. You start choosing your story. And that choice? That's emotional freedom. Imagine you're running a marathon. The first few miles are steady, even sluggish. But as you see the finish line, something shifts. Your pace quickens. Your focus sharpens. Your body finds energy it didn't have before. This isn't just adrenaline, it's the goal gradient effect. You work harder as you near a goal, even if that goal is arbitrary. Finish lines pull harder than starting lines. First studied by psychologist Clark Hull in 1932, this effect was observed in rats. The closer they got to a food reward, the faster they ran. Later, humans showed the same pattern. In loyalty card programs, people bought coffee more quickly when they were close to a free cup, even if the progress was an illusion. A 10-stamp card with 2 pre-stamped felt more motivating than an 8-stamp card that required the same effort. It's not just about distance, it's about perceived progress. This effect is everywhere. Students study harder the night before an exam. Employees push themselves near deadlines. People save more aggressively when they see their goal in sight. It's not rational, it's psychological momentum. The nearer we are to completion, the more our brain engages. The reward feels real, tangible, urgent. But here's the twist. The goal gradient can be manipulated. Marketers know how to structure goals to make you chase them. Game designers stretch progress bars to keep you playing. And sometimes the finish line isn't even real. It's just pixels, numbers, a fabricated target that feels just close enough. So, next time you feel a burst of effort near the end, ask, am I chasing value or just chasing closure? Because sometimes the finish line you're sprinting toward was designed to make you run. Imagine meeting someone new. They seem cold, uninterested. You tell yourself, that's who they are. Weeks pass. They open up, show warmth, kindness, vulnerability, but still, your mind clings to that first version. That's impression bias. It's the tendency to believe our first impression more than any evidence that follows. Even when people change, we often don't. Our brain anchors early. It forms judgments fast and holds tight, because to the mind, change feels risky. Revising a belief takes effort, uncertainty. But impressions are snapshots, not stories. They capture a moment, not a person. In one study, participants formed opinions after just 30 seconds of interaction, and those opinions shaped their responses, even when given contradicting data later. First impressions create filters. They don't just color what we see, they change what we notice. And that's dangerous, because people grow, people heal, people surprise us, but only if we let them. Impression bias doesn't just freeze others, it freezes us. It keeps us in a story that no longer fits. The challenge is to update the file, to meet people again, even if you've known them for years, to say, maybe I was wrong, maybe they're different, maybe I didn't see everything. And in that space, you allow for truth. Not the truth of a moment, but the truth of a person unfolding. Slowly, authentically, one moment at a time. Imagine hearing a song and instantly thinking of a breakup, or smelling sunscreen and feeling like you're at the beach again. That's associative memory. It's how your brain links things that happen at the same time, even if they are unrelated. And while that's powerful, it comes with a flaw: associative memory bias. Your mind doesn't just connect things, it believes in those connections. When two things co-occur often enough, your brain treats the link as fact. You see a black cat and expect bad luck. You always got sick in winter, so you fear the cold. A smile and a compliment make you trust someone. A certain smell triggers grief. Your memory weaves meaning through repetition, but meaning isn't always accurate. In one study, people were more likely to associate neutral words with danger after hearing them paired repeatedly with negative ones. No logic, just exposure. This bias creeps into daily life. You avoid someone who looks like someone who hurt you. You trust a brand because it played during your favorite show. You doubt someone's honesty because they remind you of a liar. This bias isn't rational, it's emotional, but it feels real. Advertisers know it, politicians use it, and unless you become aware, those false links quietly shape your beliefs. Association isn't causation, and memory isn't truth, but awareness, that's freedom. Choose your connections wisely. Imagine meeting someone new. They're from a group you've heard stories about. Race, religion, political side, profession. Before they even speak, your mind fills in the blanks. You expect them to act a certain way, think a certain thing, be a certain kind of person, and when they do, you nod, thinking, I knew it. That's group attribution error, the cognitive bias where we judge an individual by the stereotypes of their group, and then use that one person to reinforce the stereotype. What if your certainty isn't awareness, but projection? In a study, participants were shown a single member of a political group behaving badly. Most assumed the entire group shared those traits. Even when told the individual was atypical, the brain craves patterns, so it turns people into categories. Complexity into caricature. It shows up in courtrooms, in classrooms, on streets. One person cuts you off in traffic, and suddenly, all cyclists are reckless. A bad interaction with a tourist becomes, that whole country is rude. It's lazy logic dressed as experience. Group attribution error reduces people to symbols. One protester becomes the whole movement. One criminal defines a neighborhood. One story becomes the narrative. And just like that, empathy dies. To fight it, ask, if this person were alone, without a label, would I judge them the same? Would I give them space to be human? The truth is, categories comfort us, but they also blind us. And the moment you turn a person into a type, you stop seeing who they really are. One person is not a nation. One voice is not a chorus. To see clearly, you must look past the group and into the face. That's where truth lives, because humanity isn't found in labels. It's found in listening. What if the spotlight in your memories always pointed at you? Imagine recalling a group project from years ago. You remember doing the most work, taking the lead, saving it in the end. But ask your teammates, and they say the same about themselves. That's egocentric bias, the tendency to overestimate your own role in shared experiences. Because to you, your story always plays from center stage. It's not arrogance, it's perspective. Your thoughts, feelings, and actions are vividly detailed in your memory. Everyone else? They're blurry background figures. You don't see the hours they spent worrying, working, struggling. So their effort shrinks, and yours expands, becoming the main character in every recollection. In one experiment, couples were asked what percentage of the housework they each did. The total often exceeded 100%. Both partners believed they contributed more than half. Because we remember what we did, not what we saw, and memory favors the first-person view. The spotlight never pans left. It stays fixed on us. This bias shapes conflict, recognition, leadership, even history. It makes us feel underappreciated, overburdened, forgotten. It fuels resentment, not because others failed us, but because we forgot their part in the play. We weren't the only ones on stage, just the only ones in our own spotlight. But there's power in stepping back, in asking, what did they remember? In imagining their script, not just yours, because humility begins where certainty ends. And when you shrink your role, you finally see the whole show. And often, it's more beautiful that way. The true story is a shared one, but you'll never see it if you're always standing center stage. Imagine you have an important exam tomorrow. Instead of studying, you stay up all night watching movies. The next day, you bomb the test. But at least you can say, I was tired. That excuse, it's not random. It's a strategy. This is self-handicapping, when you sabotage yourself before a challenge, so failure hurts less. It's a twisted form of self-protection that masks fear as choice. It's the ego's way of saying, I didn't fail, I just didn't try. Psychologists first identified this behavior in the 1970s. In one classic study, students were told they'd be taking a difficult test after a successful practice run. Before the real test, they were offered a choice between a performance-enhancing drug and a performance-inhibiting one. Many chose the inhibitor. Why? So they could blame the drug if they failed. The risk of being exposed as not good enough felt worse than the failure itself. You'll see self-handicapping everywhere. A musician skips rehearsals before a big show. A job candidate shows up unprepared. A student doesn't start the paper until midnight. A runner eats junk food the night before a race. If they fall short, they can point to the sabotage, not their skill. It's a cushion for the ego. I could have done better if I'd really tried. But here's the trap. This defense becomes a prison. The more you rely on excuses, the more you fear real effort. Because effort without excuses means exposure, and exposure feels like danger. You stop risking growth to protect your pride, and in doing so, you never reach your full potential. So next time you feel the urge to delay, to distract, to self-sabotage, pause. Ask yourself, am I trying to win or am I trying to be safe? Because real success demands vulnerability. It demands that you show up fully, no backup excuses, just you, and the courage to find out what you're really capable of. Imagine signing up for something, a subscription, a service, a policy. You see the default choice already selected. You could change it. You could compare options, but instead, you leave it as is. Not because it's the best, but because it's already there. That's the default effect, the powerful tendency to stick with preset choices even when better options exist. What if your decision wasn't a decision at all, but a quiet surrender? In a landmark study on organ donation, countries with opt-out policies had dramatically higher donor rates than those with opt-in systems. Same people, same beliefs. But the default made all the difference. Inaction became action. Choice became inertia. It shows up in tech, default privacy settings you never read. In healthcare, generic plans you didn't question. In politics, ballots where one party is listed first. The default isn't neutral. It nudges you. It shapes you. And most of the time, you don't even notice. The default effect thrives on fatigue, on overwhelm, on trust in the system. You assume the default must be the safest, smartest, most common sense path, but often it's just the easiest to ignore. And sometimes it's the one someone else wants you to take. To resist it, ask, would I pick this if nothing was pre-selected? Would I still choose it if effort were required? Because real freedom isn't just having options. It's having the awareness and the energy to question what's already chosen for you. The default isn't just a setting. It's a story someone else wrote for you. To change it, you must first see it, and then ask, is this mine or just the path of least resistance? In a world designed to decide for you, the boldest act is to choose. Not passively, not conveniently, but consciously. Imagine being full after a big meal and thinking, I'll never be hungry again. Or feeling heartbroken and believing you'll never fall in love. That's the projection heuristic. It's your brain's tendency to assume that how you feel now is how you'll always feel. But emotions shift fast. What seems permanent in the moment rarely is. When you're calm, you think you'll stay calm in chaos. When you're angry, you assume that rage will still make sense tomorrow. But time softens everything. You forget how intense it felt. In studies, people misjudge their future desires based on their current state. Hungry people overestimate how much food they'll want tomorrow. Anxious people think they'll always feel afraid. The problem isn't feeling, it's forecasting. We plan our lives around passing storms. We make promises we can't keep. We build walls we no longer need. But your future self is not your present self. Feelings are weather, not climate. The key is to remember how fast they change. When making decisions, pause. Ask, what would this feel like in a different mood? Would it still matter tomorrow? Or next week? You don't need to ignore your emotions. You need to timestamp them. Recognize them as real, but temporary. That awareness gives you leverage. It lets you decide with clarity, not urgency. You are more than this moment. You are the sum of all your states, past, present, and possible. Don't let one emotion write your future. Let it whisper, but never steer. Because tomorrow, you'll feel differently. And that difference could change everything. Learn to expect the shift. Plan for change. Your emotions are valid, but they are not prophecies. They are passing signals, not final truths. Imagine walking into a room and hearing one loud voice above the rest. Instantly, your attention locks on it. Not because it's the smartest, not because it's right, but because it's loud. That's salience bias, the tendency to focus on the most noticeable information, even when it's irrelevant. What if what grabs your attention isn't what deserves it? In one study, people judged a crime more harshly when they saw a video of the suspect's confession, regardless of the facts. Why? Because the face was vivid, salient. It overwhelmed context. The brain equates visibility with truth, volume with value. This is why sensational headlines stick. Why dramatic stories eclipse boring statistics. Why one emotional anecdote can erase decades of solid research. Your mind isn't weighing importance. It's chasing brightness. Color, volume, emotion, fear. These hijack your focus. It shows up in arguments. The person yelling seems more passionate. In marketing, flashy packaging wins. In politics, one viral moment overshadows policy. We miss the signal because we're hypnotized by the noise. Salience bias doesn't just distort perception, it shapes memory. You remember the explosion, not the buildup. The scandal, not the system. The outlier, not the average. To resist it, ask, is this vivid or is it valid? Does it shine because it's true or because it's loud? Real insight isn't always obvious. Sometimes it whispers, and you'll only hear it if you look past the spotlight and into the shadows, where the truth waits, unnoticed. In a world flooded with noise, wisdom is often quiet. Train your mind to notice not just what flashes, but what matters. Because what demands attention isn't always what deserves it. What if your brain treated the future like it barely existed? Imagine being offered two choices, $50 today or $100 a year from now. Logically, the smarter choice is to wait. But most people take the $50. That instinct? That's temporal discounting. The tendency to devalue rewards the farther they are in the future. The present feels vivid. The future feels like fiction. Your brain evolved for survival, not saving. In the wild, waiting meant risk. Food could rot. Rivals could steal. So, the now became sacred. Today's certainty over tomorrow's promise. But in a modern world of long-term plans and delayed gratification, this bias backfires hard. Studies show people consistently choose smaller, immediate rewards over larger, delayed ones, even when the delay is short. Smokers light another cigarette. Eaters eat the cookie. Investors sell too soon. Students binge Netflix instead of studying. We trade future gain for present pleasure, even when we know better. Why? Because now feels real. Later feels imaginary. And what's imagined is easy to ignore. Temporal discounting explains credit card debt, procrastination, addiction, burnout. It's not that we lack discipline, it's that we weigh time irrationally. We shrink the value of what's far away. We betray our future selves for momentary relief. But the future will arrive, and when it does, it becomes the new now. The decisions you make today become the life you live tomorrow. Power comes from remembering that, from imagining the future with clarity and compassion. Because every choice is a vote for the person you'll become. And the more real that future feels, the wiser your choices will be. So ask yourself, what does your future self need from you right now? What if the version of you that answers questions wasn't entirely honest? Imagine filling out a survey that asks, do you always tell the truth? You hesitate, then check yes. Do you recycle? Are you kind to strangers? Do you gossip? You answer as who you want to be, not necessarily who you are. That's social desirability bias, the human tendency to respond in ways that make us look good, even if it's not entirely true. This bias doesn't mean you're lying. It means you're curating. You exaggerate virtues, downplay flaws, not just to others, but to yourself. In studies, people overreport good behavior, voting, exercising, donating, and underreport bad habits, cheating, smoking, judging. Because being liked feels safer than being honest, and fitting in feels more urgent than being seen. It's most common in interviews, surveys, and social media. Anywhere we're observed or evaluated, we wear masks of politeness, productivity, compassion. But behind them are complexities we're afraid to reveal, not because they're shameful, but because they're real. And being real in public is terrifying. This bias distorts data, warps research, breaks intimacy. It keeps us agreeable, but inauthentic. We nod when we want to speak up. We smile when we want to cry. And over time, it blurs who we really are. But truth doesn't grow in approval. It grows in vulnerability, in the courage to say, this is me, flawed, honest, real. When you let go of how you want to appear, you finally discover who you actually are. And that version? It might be less polished, but it's grounded, present, and unforgettable. The truth doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. What if someone told you the earth was flat, but their argument sounded logical? You'd laugh it off. But what if someone made a weak argument for something you already believed? You might nod along. That's belief bias, the mental shortcut where your brain evaluates logic based on the conclusion, not the actual reasoning. If an argument confirms your beliefs, your brain lets its guard down. It says, "This feels right," even if it's built on broken logic. But if an argument challenges your beliefs, even with flawless structure, you'll find a way to reject it. Not because it's wrong, but because it's uncomfortable. Familiarity beats accuracy. Emotion wins over logic. In one famous study, participants read arguments that were either logically valid or invalid, and either agreed or disagreed with their personal beliefs. Time after time, people rated the poor arguments that matched their beliefs as stronger than the logical ones that didn't. Truth was overpowered by familiarity. Comfort became the compass. Belief bias is why misinformation spreads so easily. A shaky theory that supports your view gets a pass. A rock-solid fact that challenges it, scrutinized. It happens in politics, religion, science, even love. We're not searching for truth. We're searching for validation, for armor, for belonging. And this bias can blind us to better decisions. It builds echo chambers, fuels tribalism, turns healthy debate into emotional warfare. Because in the end, you're not arguing about logic. You're protecting identity. You're defending the version of reality you feel safe inside. To fight belief bias, you have to do the hardest thing of all: doubt yourself. Not because you're wrong, but because you might be. Truth doesn't feel like comfort. It feels like friction, and sometimes that's the only way forward. Imagine this: you find $100 on the sidewalk. Instantly, it feels like a lucky break, a bonus. You take friends out for drinks, maybe buy something ridiculous online. Now imagine that same $100 came from your hard-earned paycheck. Feels different, right? You're more cautious, more strategic, same amount, different behavior. Why? This is mental accounting, a psychological illusion where we treat money differently depending on where it came from or what we label it as, despite the fact that economically, every dollar is identical. Money is fungible. But your brain doesn't care. You might call it your vacation fund or emergency savings or casino winnings. These labels change your emotional attachment to it. Studies show people spend tax refunds faster than paychecks and gamble casino winnings more recklessly than their own earnings. Even store credit feels less real than cash because it was framed differently. It's irrational, but consistent. You'll drive across town to save $20 on a $50 purchase, but won't blink at skipping the same savings on a $1,000 item. That's not logic. That's mental compartmentalization. It's how marketers trick you. It's why budgeting apps give categories, why casinos give chips, and why we feel rich after a bonus but broke after rent. This bias sabotages smart financial choices. We donate from windfalls but ignore retirement. We blow gift cards on junk we'd never buy otherwise. We overtip with surprise money but hoard regular income. Mental accounting makes us feel in control, but it manipulates our decisions. Until we accept that money is just money, unlabeled, uncaring, equal in power, we remain captives of our own illusions. Emotional economics is a beautiful lie, but it costs us. Slowly, invisibly, endlessly. What if time warped your desires, without you even noticing? Imagine being offered two options, $100 in a year or $50 today. You wait. You choose the $100. Now imagine it's $100 tomorrow, or $50 right now. Suddenly the $50 feels irresistible. That's hyperbolic discounting, the tendency to value rewards more the closer they are to the present, even if it's irrational. This isn't just impatience, it's how the brain miscalculates time. We discount future rewards, but not linearly. The curve is steep at first, then flattens out. A month from now feels far, but a year from now doesn't feel that much farther. That's why long-term planning collapses under short-term temptation. In studies, people make smart choices for their future selves, until the reward is close. Deeters plan meals, smokers promise to quit, students schedule study time. But when the present arrives, the future's logic is drowned by now's craving. The closer the reward, the louder it speaks. What once felt easy to resist now feels impossible to ignore. This bias explains procrastination, debt, addiction. It's not that we don't know better. It's that later always loses to now, We abandon goals for impulses, plans for pleasure, not because we're weak, but because time distorts value. What's distant is discounted. What's near glows with urgency. But here's the truth. Later becomes now, faster than you think. And regret is just memory catching up to desire. Wisdom is learning to delay the rush, to feel the pull of now, but act for the version of you who will wake up tomorrow. Because discipline isn't denial, it's time travel. It's future you whispering through the fog of urgency. Wait, it's worth it. And if you listen, your life will thank you. Imagine walking into a haunted house after hearing terrifying stories. Every creak, every shadow feels sinister. Your heart races, your senses sharpen. Now imagine walking into the same house believing it's just an old building. Suddenly the creaks are harmless. The shadows don't bother you. That's not magic. That's expectation bias, your brain shaping reality to match what it expects. Your mind is not a camera. It's a prediction engine. Before you even see, hear, or feel something, your brain makes a guess. And once that prediction is made, it colors everything that follows. If you expect pain, the sensation worsens. If you expect joy, even small pleasures feel magnified. Expectation sculpts perception. In a landmark study, wine labeled as expensive was rated better. Even when it was identical to the cheap bottle, people tasted quality because they expected it. Patients report stronger effects from pills they believe in, even if the pills are sugar. That's the placebo effect. But it's more than medicine. It's your everyday life. If you expect someone to be rude, you'll notice every awkward glance. If you believe someone is kind, you'll forgive their flaws. Expectations shape relationships, memories, even how food tastes. It's not just what happens, it's what you believe will happen. Expectation bias is powerful and dangerous. It creates self-fulfilling prophecies, prejudice, false memories, misjudged trust. When your brain bets on a story, it doubles down, ignoring anything that doesn't fit the script. To break free, you must question the script. Pause before judgment. Expectation is not truth, it's a lens. And if you don't clean the lens, you might spend your life mistaking illusion for reality. What if chasing one dream poisoned everything around it? Imagine you start running every morning to lose weight. You tie your shoes, hit the road, sweat, endure, but weeks later, you quit. The weight didn't drop. The goal failed. And now, you can't even look at your running shoes. That's goal contamination. The effect where anything associated with a failed goal becomes tainted, avoided, or abandoned, even if it once brought you joy. It's not just a personal quirk, it's psychological. In one study, participants who associated a task with a goal that later became unattainable showed less interest in the task itself. The failure didn't just block the outcome, it infected the method. The process gets blamed alongside the dream, like guilt by association. But for actions and objects, this bias infects habits, hobbies, people, places. You avoid the gym because it reminds you of when you couldn't stay fit. You ghost a friend because they knew you during a failed career. You stop painting because you once tried to sell art and no one bought. The dream collapses and takes pieces of you with it. We assume the goal gave meaning to the action, but often it was the action that had meaning all along. Running felt good, painting was peace, the gym was strength. But once failure entered the frame, everything got stained. We don't just mourn the dream, we bury the path too. But here's the truth. Failure doesn't poison things. We do, by chaining everything to a single outcome. Let go of the destination, and you free the path. Because what you loved before the goal is still waiting. And this time, you don't need a reason to return. You just need to remember why it mattered in the first place. The joy wasn't in the outcome, it was always in the doing. Global neglect. Bias, imagine this. A single plane crash dominates headlines. Every passenger becomes a story, every second analyzed. Meanwhile, air pollution, silent and unseen, kills 7 million people a year. No sirens, no cameras, no outcry. That's global neglect bias. Our brains lock onto isolated events, but go blind to the slow-motion collapse of entire systems. We're wired to respond to fear, to flashes of emotion, not long-term patterns. A wildfire on TV grabs you more than decades of deforestation. One child stuck in a well will move you more than the millions without clean water. It's not that we don't care, it's that our minds weren't built for scale. Emotion outpaces logic. Urgency buries scope. In a famous study, people gave more to save a single named girl than they did to help thousands. The larger the problem, the less real it feels. That's not apathy. That's the brain folding under scale. Global neglect. Bias shrinks our empathy when the numbers grow too large to hold emotionally. This bias infects politics, policy, even philanthropy. Billions go to headline crises, while root causes stay ignored. We treat symptoms, not systems. We obsess over dramatic incidents, terror attacks, school shootings, celebrity tragedies, while diseases, poverty, and climate degradation dismantle lives in silence. And so, disaster hides in plain sight. Infrastructure decays, oceans rise, entire generations suffer, not from sudden shocks, but from long, invisible emergencies. The world doesn't end with a bang. It erodes in silence. To see clearly, we must break the bias, train ourselves to feel the weight of numbers, to find meaning not just in shock, but in silence, because the world won't collapse in explosions. It'll collapse quietly, while we're all watching something else. Imagine you're absolutely sure you're right. You bet on it, argue for it, maybe even stake your reputation on it, but then you're proven wrong. That burning flush of shock? That's the overconfidence effect revealing itself. This bias tricks your brain into believing you know more than you actually do. You feel certain, but confidence doesn't equal competence. In a famous study, people answered trivia questions and then rated how confident they were in their answers. When they claimed to be 100% sure, they were right only about 70% of the time, and the smarter the person, often the worse the bias. Experts, paradoxically, can be more vulnerable. They mistake knowledge in one area for authority in all. It affects everything. Pilots crash planes from ignored warnings. Investors lose millions believing they've found a pattern. Doctors misdiagnose because the symptoms fit too well. In courtrooms, in labs, in war rooms, overconfidence makes us blind. Not to facts, but to the limits of our own understanding. Worse still, it feels good. Certainty is seductive. It's power. It's clarity. Doubt, by contrast, feels like weakness. But the truth? Doubt is a survival tool. Confidence should grow with knowledge, but overconfidence grows in its shadow, fed by pride. So what if the next time you feel absolutely sure, you pause? Ask yourself, what if I'm wrong? Not to discredit yourself, but to sharpen your awareness. The wisest minds aren't the loudest. They're the ones who know how much they don't know, and choose humility over ego. The overconfidence effect isn't about being wrong. It's about being certain you're right when you're not. And that's when mistakes become irreversible, when certainty drowns out curiosity and ego silences truth. What if your brain didn't seek truth, but comfort? Imagine clinging to the same toxic relationship, the same self-destructive thought, the same limiting belief. Not because it's right, but because it's familiar. This is the familiarity principle. Your brain evolved to prefer what it already knows. In our ancestral past, unfamiliar often meant dangerous. Familiar faces, paths, foods, they meant survival. So now, your brain still whispers, if I've seen it before, it must be safe. But that's not always true. Studies on the mirror exposure effect show that people rate repeated stimuli, words, images, even false information, as more likable and more accurate just because they've seen them before. That's why propaganda works. That's why abusers manipulate. That's why old habits feel like home. Even when they're hurting you, we trust what repeats. And repetition becomes mistaken for truth. You stay in a job that drains you. You revisit relationships that break you. You believe inner voices that limit you, all because they're known. Predictability feels safer than change. Even pain can feel like home if you've lived in it long enough. Repetition calms the brain's fear center. Familiarity reduces cortisol, even if what's familiar is cruel. But here's the twist. Familiarity isn't proof. It's just repetition with a mask on. What's repeated isn't always right, and what's new isn't always dangerous. Growth requires discomfort. Healing demands unfamiliarity. Real safety lies beyond the known. So next time you choose, ask, is this truly good or just known? Because comfort can become a cage, and what you think is safety might just be your trap. Escape it. What if everything you believe about how the world works is just a story? A neatly packaged, emotionally satisfying narrative that conceals a chaotic, statistical reality. Imagine a man wins the lottery twice. The headlines call it fate, divine intervention, a miracle. But the math, it's indifferent. A 1 in 17 trillion probability doesn't whisper purpose, it shouts randomness. Yet we believe the story, not the statistics. Humans crave meaning. We reshape randomness into patterns. We mold accidents into arcs. That's the narrative fallacy. The irresistible urge to explain the unexplainable through story. A company crashes, we blame the CEO's misstep, not global volatility. A singer rises to fame, we credit a single YouTube video, not years of grinding. We invent logic where there is only chaos. Even when people die in disasters, we rush to find causes, villains, or omens. Anything to avoid accepting senselessness. But this longing for coherence is dangerous. Doctors overlook rare diseases because they don't fit the textbook plot. Jurors believe emotionally charged testimony over silent forensic data. Investors fall for founders with compelling childhood tales rather than balance sheets. Politicians manipulate this flaw, wrapping lies in stories that feel true and righteous. Stories are compelling, but reality? It's messy. It's built on noise, uncertainty, and billions of invisible threads. To see clearly, we must silence the inner novelist. So, next time a story seems too perfect, pause. Ask yourself, is this truth or just fiction that flatters your need for meaning? Truth is rarely told in story form. It lives in the cold, brutal data we ignore, waiting to be seen at last. What if the very thing we avoid is the thing our brain craves? Imagine you're studying for an exam, and you read a critical paragraph only once. It made sense, so you move on. But a week later, the information is gone, not because it was unimportant, but because it was never repeated. This is redundancy aversion, the psychological resistance to repeating information, even when that repetition is exactly what builds memory. We think we got it the first time, so we treat repetition like a waste of time. But memory doesn't work that way. The brain encodes information into long-term storage through spaced repetition. Without it, knowledge fades. Studies show that people forget nearly 90% of new material after just a few days if they don't revisit it. Yet still, we skip repetition because it feels tedious, inefficient, or unnecessary. In conversation, this bias can be dangerous. A team might gloss over reclarifying a safety protocol, assuming we've already said it. A teacher might not repeat a concept enough, thinking it's obvious. A parent might assume a child knows the rules because they mentioned them once. But memory isn't passive, it's sculpted through revisits. Every time we hear something again, the neural pathways deepen, stabilizing the memory like carving grooves in stone. Redundancy doesn't mean incompetence, it means reinforcement. The military repeats commands, pilots confirm directions, doctors recheck dosages. Why? Because repetition prevents disaster. Our discomfort with repeating ourselves is irrational, born not from logic, but from social pressure and false efficiency. What if we embrace that logic in everyday life? What if we stopped fearing the echo and started using it to carve memory into permanence? Sometimes, the second telling saves the truth from fading. Imagine speeding down a highway, ignoring the seatbelt, phone in hand. You've seen the crash statistics, watched the safety videos, but deep down, you believe it won't happen to you. That's invincibility bias, the quiet, dangerous illusion that you are the exception to the rule. It's why we smoke even after watching a loved one die of lung disease. Why we skip sunscreen, drink and drive, ignore deadlines, trust that risks apply to everyone else. But not us. This bias isn't stupidity. It's survival wiring twisted out of shape. Your brain protects your self-image by whispering, "You'll be fine." In psychological studies, people consistently rate themselves as less likely than others to suffer harm. From cancer, accidents, bankruptcy. Even soldiers in combat zones report feeling uniquely protected. That illusion can boost confidence, yes, but it also invites disaster. Invincibility bias thrives in youth, in privilege, in repetition. The more times you get away with something, the more you believe you always will. Until one day, you don't. And then the rule that felt like fiction becomes terrifyingly real. It's why financial bubbles pop. Why addicts overdose after one last time. Why people ignore symptoms until it's too late. The belief that I'm different is comforting, but it's not true. You are made of flesh, of probability, of cause and consequence, just like everyone else. The hardest truths are the ones we think don't apply to us, But reality is not swayed by belief. And sooner or later, every exception meets its limit. Sometimes it's a crash. Sometimes a diagnosis. Sometimes a silence that never ends. Invincibility is a myth. The sooner you see through it, the better chance you have of surviving it. What if the most dangerous lies aren't bold? They're balanced. Imagine hearing, both sides are equally bad, or this is just like that. It sounds fair, reasonable, but this is the trap of false equivalence, a bias that flattens complexity by treating two things as if they were equal, even when they're not. You see it in debates, in news, in everyday life. A scientist warns about climate change, and someone says, well, others disagree. A doctor explains vaccines, and someone counters with a blog. It feels like balance, but it's distortion disguised as fairness. In one famous case, media coverage gave equal time to both climate scientists and deniers, creating the illusion of a 50-50 split. The reality? Over 97% of scientists agreed on the data, but false equivalence made them seem equally valid. It's a bias that values symmetry over truth. It's not just politics. Imagine comparing a teenager stealing candy with a CEO stealing billions. Both broke the law, right? Technically. But the scale, impact, and intent are worlds apart. False equivalence ignores that. It makes moral judgments feel cleaner, because nuance is messy. It even seeps into history. Calling all revolutions violent ignores why they erupted. Equating peaceful protests with oppressive regimes erases context. This bias thrives in discomfort. When truth is complicated, false equivalence offers a shortcut, a shield. It lets us say, I don't pick sides, when one side may clearly be wrong. It's a defense mechanism against responsibility, because acknowledging imbalance demands action. So what if the next time you feel tempted to say, they're both bad, you paused, dug deeper? Truth isn't always in the middle. Sometimes it leans, and seeing clearly means resisting the urge to balance what was never equal. What if you didn't know yourself as well as you think? Imagine believing you're acting out of love, justice, or logic, when deep down, your true motives are unconscious, shaped by forces you're blind to. This is the introspection illusion, the belief that we know the reasons behind our thoughts, choices, and emotions. But neuroscience tells another story. Most of what drives us never rises to consciousness. Our explanations? They're guesses, stories stitched together after the fact to protect our identity. Take this. In a study, participants were asked to choose between two identical items. Once they picked, they were asked to justify their choice. Most gave confident answers, completely unaware that the items were actually the same. Their brains invented logic where there was none. This isn't an exception. It's how we operate. You justify why you snapped at someone, why you ignored a call, or stayed in a situation too long, without realizing you're inventing reasons that feel right, not reasons that are true. The mind prefers coherence over truth. So, we defend decisions made in fear as confidence. We call jealousy love, and we confuse habit with passion. You're not lying to others. You're lying to yourself, unknowingly. That's the danger. Real growth begins when you admit, I don't fully understand myself. Only then do you begin to notice the deeper scripts running below your thoughts. Because maybe, just maybe, you're not the narrator. You're the story. You are not the mind observing the world. You are the echo of choices you didn't know you made. And until you question them, they will keep writing your future. Self-awareness isn't about finding answers. It's about asking better questions. What if the truth was wrapped in something plain, while the lie wore designer clothing? Imagine you walk into a store and see two products. One is sleek, minimalist, beautifully packaged. The other looks cheap, dull, unremarkable. Without even reading the labels, you already trust one more. That's package bias. Your brain equates beauty with quality, form with truth, and it gets fooled. Think about it. Political candidates with better posture and polished speech win more support, even if their ideas are hollow. Fancy infographics can make bad data look legitimate. A self-help book with a golden cover outsells a scientifically grounded one in black and white. We confuse presentation with credibility, and we do it everywhere. In classrooms, courtrooms, boardrooms, newsrooms. Marketers know this. That's why junk food comes in vibrant colors, and harmful apps are wrapped in calming, friendly design. We're not buying the product. We're buying the feeling it gives us at first glance. Our brains evolved to judge books by their covers because speed once meant survival. But now, that instinct is a liability. Manipulators know how to weaponize it. It doesn't just trick consumers, it warps justice, education, even democracy. Jurors favor lawyers with better suits. Students rate stylish teachers as smarter. Voters trust candidates who look presidential. But Polish isn't truth. It's performance meant to deceive, distract, distort. So, next time something looks amazing, pause. Strip away the gloss, the shine, the charm. What's really inside? The truth doesn't always sparkle. Sometimes it's dressed in rags, whispering from the back of the room, quiet, honest, and ignored. Look deeper. What if your mind was quietly working to protect a system that harms you? Imagine living in a society where inequality is obvious, where some people struggle to survive while others hoard luxury. You see it, feel it, but deep down, you start justifying it. That's just how things work. Hard work pays off. Even when the evidence screams otherwise, your brain seeks comfort in believing the system is fair. This is system justification bias, a deep unconscious impulse to defend the status quo, even when it's flawed or unjust. It's not about logic. It's about stability. Research shows people are more likely to blame victims than question systems. A poor person must be lazy. A mistreated worker must have deserved it. These stories protect the system because questioning it threatens your sense of order and security. Even those most harmed by a system often defend it. In one study, low-income participants favored economic policies that hurt them just to preserve a belief in fairness. It's painful to admit the game is rigged, so we rewrite the rules in our minds instead. We tell ourselves change isn't necessary, that maybe things aren't that bad, that suffering is the cost of structure, and media reinforces it. Narratives glorify the climb, not the wall itself. We celebrate success stories, not the exceptions they are. We internalize the belief that the system works, because admitting it doesn't would mean accepting we've been trapped inside a myth. But what if that need for psychological comfort is blinding us? What if the status quo survives not because it's right, but because it's repeated, normalized, and unchallenged? System justification isn't just a bias, it's a silent guardian of injustice. And the moment you question it is the moment the system begins to crack. Imagine talking to someone and thinking, I see right through you. You spot their insecurities, their motives, their contradictions. But if they claim to know you the same way, you'd scoff. That's the illusion of asymmetric insight, the belief that you understand others more deeply than they could ever understand you. It's not arrogance, it's neurological self-defense. You live inside your own mind, your doubts, dreams, private history. You see yourself in high definition, but others? You only catch snapshots, and yet you assume those glimpses are enough to know their entire truth. It's like reading a book cover and claiming you've read the novel. Psychological research confirms this bias. People consistently believe they know more about others' inner lives than others know about theirs. In politics, we assume opponents are manipulated, irrational, blind, while we're thoughtful and informed. In relationships, each person believes they're the better observer, the one who truly gets it. This illusion fuels misunderstanding. You stop asking questions. You assume intentions. You reduce people to labels, but demand to be seen in your full complexity. That imbalance creates silent wars between friends, couples, even entire cultures. It makes empathy one-sided and dialogue nearly impossible. But no one is simple. Everyone contains layers you'll never see. Trauma they never voiced, joy they never showed, regrets too painful to share. Their silence isn't emptiness. It's a depth you haven't earned access to yet. So the next time you think you've figured someone out, pause. Ask, am I truly seeing or just assuming? Because real understanding doesn't begin with certainty. It begins with humility. And sometimes the wisest thing you can do is admit that you don't know. What if numbers could lie? Not because they're wrong, but because they're too exact. Imagine trusting a prediction just because it says 92.7% instead of about 90. This is misplaced precision bias. We give more weight to data that's specific, even when that precision is meaningless. It's not logic. It's illusion. Your brain equates detail with accuracy, forgetting that decimals don't equal truth. In one experiment, people were more likely to believe a forecast saying a 73.6% chance of rain than one saying 70%. The extra digits felt scientific, even though they were arbitrary. The same happens in finance, politics, medicine. Say a politician promises 5,000 new jobs. You question it. But if they say 5,273, you're more likely to believe it, even without proof. Specificity mimics credibility, but real-world data is messy. Forecasts shift. Predictions fail. Models use assumptions you never see. A precise number often hides an imprecise truth. Yet, we still trust it. It's why ads say loses 4.3 pounds in 7 days instead of a few pounds. It sounds more researched, even if it's not. This bias makes us vulnerable. We trust investment firms predicting 8.42% returns. We follow diets claiming 12.7% fat loss. We believe AI is 96.1% accurate without questioning the data source. We accept flawed numbers because they look clean and polished. But precision without context is camouflage. Numbers can be sharp and still be wrong. So, next time you see digits stacked like armor, ask, is this meaningful or just dressed up to convince me? Because the sharpest numbers aren't always the most honest. Sometimes they're just sharper lies. Precision is only power when it's paired with truth. What if your mind couldn't let go? Not because something matters, but because it was started. Imagine watching a bad movie, but you sit through it. Not out of enjoyment, but because you're already an hour in. That's the thread completion urge. The need to finish what you began, even when it's pointless, painful, or harmful. It's not logic. It's compulsion. You read a book you don't enjoy, keep texting someone toxic, or finish a plate of food you're full from. Not because it's right, but because you started. Your brain equates completion with victory. Quitting feels like failure. Even if continuing is worse, stopping feels wrong. This urge hijacks your time, your energy, your relationships. You stay in jobs that drain you, relationships that hollow you, routines that no longer serve you, just to feel like you saw them through. You ignore change because endings are uncomfortable. Closure seduces. It whispers, don't stop now, you're almost there. But what if the real strength isn't finishing, but choosing to stop? What if walking away is wisdom, not weakness? That thread in your brain doesn't need tying off. It needs cutting. Some paths don't deserve closure. Some tasks don't need completion. Some stories must be abandoned mid-sentence. Marketers know this. They dangle series finales, to-do checklists, loyalty points, progress bars. Social media thrives on it. Notifications, streaks, endless scrolls. It's not satisfaction you're chasing. It's the illusion of a finish line. And it's deeply addicting. So next time you feel the pull to finish something that no longer makes sense, pause. Ask yourself, am I completing this because it matters, or just because it's open? What if the diploma on the wall blinded you to the truth? Imagine two people say the same thing. One wears a lab coat, the other a hoodie. The words are identical, but your brain leans toward the one with credentials. This is education bias, the tendency to give more weight to ideas from highly educated people, even when their reasoning is flawed or unsupported. We equate education with intelligence, but knowledge isn't immunity from bias. In fact, research shows that people with higher education can be even better at rationalizing their beliefs. Not because they're more correct, but because they're more skilled at arguing. They can construct airtight defenses for shaky ideas, and we fall for it. This bias is dangerous. It shuts out valid insights from less formally educated voices. A mechanic might notice a design flaw an engineer missed. A nurse aide may spot patterns a physician ignores. But if the credentials aren't impressive, the input gets dismissed. We end up valuing polish over accuracy, tone over substance. Even worse, the bias hides behind politeness. We say we trust experts, but sometimes that trust becomes blind faith. We forget that truth doesn't require a PhD. It requires curiosity, evidence, and humility. Some of history's greatest breakthroughs came from outsiders. Einstein was a patent clerk. Faraday had no formal education. Insight isn't licensed, and yet, our reflexes remain. In courtrooms, interviews, debates, we default to credentials. We listen with our eyes instead of our minds. But what if we challenge the impulse to equate education with wisdom? What if we paused before nodding just because someone sounds qualified? Education can be a light, but it can also cast shadows. And sometimes, truth hides in the voice we're trained not to hear. Imagine someone challenges a belief you've held for years about politics, religion, identity. They present facts, logic, evidence, and instead of reevaluating, you dig in deeper. You become more certain, more defensive. That's hardening bias, the paradox where pressure makes people grip false beliefs even tighter. It's not arrogance, it's psychological armor. The brain doesn't store beliefs like files, it welds them to your sense of self. So when someone attacks those beliefs, it feels like they're attacking you. And when people feel under attack, they don't listen, they protect. In one study, researchers gave participants solid evidence, disproving deeply held views. The result? People became more entrenched, not less. Brain scans showed emotional regions firing. Fear, anxiety, identity defense, not logic or reason. It wasn't about truth. It was about survival. Hardening bias explains why arguments fail, why debates turn toxic, why facts, no matter how clear, bounce off people like bullets off armor. The more cornered someone feels, the tighter they cling to fiction, because to let go feels like death, of self, of tribe, of certainty. It's how cults resist collapse, how conspiracy theories grow, how societies polarize. It's not stupidity, it's biology hijacked by fear. And the worst part? It feels righteous. You feel strong while sinking deeper into illusion. To break free, you need courage, not to defend your truth, but to question it. Ask yourself, if this belief were false, would I want to know? That one question can crack the concrete. Because sometimes real strength isn't in standing your ground. It's in stepping back, breathing deep, and being brave enough to let go. What if your greatest bias was believing you had none? Imagine looking at others and spotting their flaws, their prejudices, their irrationality, while assuming your own thinking is clear. This is meta-bias blindness. It's the illusion that we're less biased than everyone else. And ironically, that belief is a bias in itself. You've likely heard someone say, "I'm objective, I just go by facts." But when tested, people consistently rate themselves as more rational, more fair-minded, and less influenced by emotions than their peers. This isn't confidence, it's delusion. Studies show that even when people are trained to detect bias, they still overestimate how unbiased they are, while spotting flaws in others with laser precision. It's how two people can look at the same event and come away with completely different interpretations, each believing the other is blind. It's why debates escalate, why echo chambers form, why progress stalls. Because each person thinks they're the exception. And that's the trap. When you believe you're the one holding the mirror, you stop looking into it. This bias is dangerous. It closes the door to self-correction. If you think you're immune, why examine your beliefs? Why question your instincts? The moment you think you're above bias, you fall deepest into it. Real clarity begins with doubt, with the uncomfortable truth that you too are biased, shaped by experience, emotion, and flawed perception. But that awareness, that's where growth begins. Humility sharpens perception, and accountability opens the path to truth. So, the next time you're certain you're right and everyone else is wrong, pause. Not to surrender, but to wonder, what am I not seeing? Because I think I already see clearly.